Thank you. You may be seated. Honorable members, we all know the protocols. Please let's adhere to them. The first item on the order paper is a motion in the name of the Chief Whip of the Majority Party. May I recognize the Chief Whip?
Thank you very much, House Chair. House Chair, I want to move that the House knows that the Third Parliament initiated and passed Financial Management of Parliament Act 10 of 2009 in order to regulate the legislature's finances and independent arm of state. Further notes that Parliament passed FAPLA Act 34 of 2014. The House will recognize that additional amendments to the Act has been proposed to strengthen the budgeting and financial management process in Parliament and provincial legislature thereof. Instructs the House to instruct Standing Committee on Finance to review the financial management of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act by introducing amending legislation if necessary, taking into account the work done by relevant structures on the matter, including Speakers Forum, and that this committee must report to the House by the 30th of September 2021. I so move. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The motion is read. Do we have any objections, honorable members? No objections. Agreed to. The secretary will read the first order of the day.
Consideration of report of Standing Committee on Appropriations on Division of Revenue Bill.
Thank you. The Honorable Chief Whip, what do we do?
Thank you very much, House Chair. House Chair, I move that the House adopt this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections to this? No.
House Chair,
the
EFF object.
Please note the objections of the Democratic Alliance.
The objection of the Democratic Alliance and the EFF will be noted, and that is agreed to. The secretary can read now the second order.
Second reading debate, Division of Revenue Bill.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now call on the Honorable Buthelezi, who's on the virtual platform, to introduce the debate. Honorable Buthelezi.
Honorable Chair, if Honorable Buthelezi is unable to connect, there is an arrangement that has been made of a person that is inside here, Honorable Mlenzana, to come in.
Accept.
Chairperson.
Oh, thank you very much, Honorable Buthelezi. We had called for you, and it's your time now to introduce the debate to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable Ministers and Deputy Ministers, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, the African National Congress supports the Division of Revenue Bill B3 2021. The bill tabled by the Minister of Finance was crafted under very difficult socioeconomic conditions created by the advent of COVID-19. As we know, that has not just disrupted economies, it has also impacted lives, with many people dying, in some instances breadwinners. The hardships to families communities and nations are just too much. This has escalated the apartheid created problems of hunger, inequality, poverty, diseases, and skewed distribution of income. It is thus not surprising that His Excellency, President Ramaphosa in his SONA, put the defeat of the coronavirus pandemic as priority number 1 in 2021. Yes, that is evident from the DORA that we are unshaken as a country. We are determined to conquer this pandemic. This realization prompted Honorable Seiso Mohai to opine, I quote him, "The decisive intervention of government to mitigate the miseries of our people during COVID-19 pandemic has actually demonstrated the capacity of the African National Congress to live true to the ideal of being a caring government," unquote. Indeed, the 500 billion rand government's intervention aimed at saving lives and livelihood shows how caring this government is. Honorable members, we must remember the very difficult economic and fiscal conditions under which this budget was formulated. Economies in the whole world closed down, infrastructure projects could not continue, tourism came to a complete halt, mining and trade stopped. Consequently, our economy contracted by 7.2%, revenue under collection of 213 billion rand, debt to GDP ratio deteriorated to 80.3%, and even more worrying, unemployment rate has increased to 32.5%. The African National Congress congratulates the Minister of Finance and his team that despite these challenges, they were able to keep consolidated expenditure over 2 trillion rand over the MTEF. National government receives 48.7%, provinces 41.9%, local government 9.4%, rising to 9.7% in 23-24 of the nationally raised revenue. Want to say here and now that we are happy that this DORA remains pro-poor. 56% of the budget is allocated to education, health, and social development. This is meant to provide the safety net for the most vulnerable section of our people. Chairperson, we also welcome the fact that the division of revenue is redistributive. What does that mean, honorable members? It means that although the tax base is mainly in urban areas, it is the rural areas who receive more per capita per household. For instance, rural municipalities are allocated about 3 times more per household than metros in equitable share and about twice in conditional grants. Rural municipalities receive 11,700 rand per household, while metros receive 4,900 rand per household. Remember, apartheid through a myriad of oppressive and repressive laws condemned majority of Black people to arid and unproductive land in the rural areas. So this bill is our attempt as the progressive government to clean apartheid mess. Honorable Chairperson, the sustainability of our ability to deliver on the needs of our people is dependent on the economy that is inclusive and growing. It is also dependent on restoring fiscal sustainability. This is incongruent with the overriding priorities of 2021 announced by His Excellency the President. He cited the implementation of economic reforms so as to create sustainable jobs and drive inclusive growth and also accelerate economic recovery. That is why the solution to our problem is an economy that is growing and growing at a faster rate. Hence, the President announced the ERRP on the 15th of October 2020. Among the objectives of the ERRP is to create jobs, primarily through aggressive infrastructure investment and mass employment programs. That is why in reprioritization, infrastructure spending is protected, except where there's undeniable evidence of perennial underspending. The importance of infrastructure is also recognized by allowing 5% of municipalities' allocation to be used for the development of an infrastructure asset management plan. This is meant to unleash the potential of infrastructure in growing the economy. Malunga hloniphekeleyo alendlu, ngaphambi kokuba ontaba kayikhonjwa baqale bagxumagxume bathi asenzi lutho. Bayathanda-ke ukubona bakuthandayo bashiye okunye. I would like to cite a few examples for South Africans of the strides that have been taken to implement ERRP. 1. 430,000 jobs have already been supported through the employment creation initiatives announced by government. 180,000 jobs are in the recruitment process. While jobs are critical for sustenance of our people's livelihoods, they also increase disposable income in the hands of our people, which goes back to the economy, ultimately leading to the GDP growth. In October 2020, electricity regulations were amended to enable municipalities to procure more from independent power producers. This is important to augment energy by ESCOM. We urge government to ensure that Black companies, women-owned companies, cooperatives are given a slice of this new opportunity. We also welcome the fact that large users of sugar have agreed to procure at least 80% of their supply from local growers. Honorable Chairperson, can we in the same vein ensure that small sugarcane growers benefit from this progressive initiative? It will be an exercise in futility if conditions of investing in municipalities are not improved. Ease of doing business at local government level is important. That will help municipalities to also contribute to the RRP and to increase their revenue base. Chairperson, it is thus fallacious and completely false to argue that nothing is being done. My comrades will talk about many other things which show agility and responsiveness of the ANC-led government in prioritizing our people and undo the very deep roots of apartheid, a system which thought it was good not to supply electricity to Black people, a system which thought it was proper not to give houses to Black people, a system which said it was a white preserve to be taught mathematics and engineering. Chairperson, the majority of Black people in this parliament know how it feels to be denied the basic right to education, while others took it for granted. They know to get the right to a better education than to survive tear gas, live bullets, soldiers camping in their campuses, imprisonment, and even death itself. In this regard, I'm reminded of Jonathan Klassen, 21, Sean Mahmoud, 15, and Michael Miranda, 11, killed in Athlone in what became known as the Trojan Horse Massacre. The memory of Hector Peterson reminds us that the struggle for education is very important for a Black child. We therefore welcome the reprioritization of funds to meet the 7 billion rand shortfall in NSFAS, to fund first-time students and 32 billion rand, which will go towards funding more than 400,000 students in universities and 300,000 in TVET colleges. Chairperson, we are also calling upon the private sector to come to the party and invest in human capital through funding education. This cannot be left to government only. It is about the future of our economy, of our country. Indeed, the doors of learning and of culture shall be open. We are sending our heartfelt condolences to the Ntumba family and all those who might have been injured in the process. We should not lose life for this basic right. The ANC supports the division of the revenue bill. I'm giving the remainder of my minutes to Honorable Dipuo Peters, Chairperson.
How do you know that you have?
Yeah, it's maning.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Hill Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Division of Revenue Bill sets out how government spending is apportioned between the spheres of government, national, provincial, and local. But it is local and provincial governments in the main which deliver primarily basic services for the poor and those who need it the most. Things like clinics, water, toilets, public transport, school feeding for children, and much more besides. So while the government has made the right decision, as we said in last week's debate, to get debt under control by tightly reining in spending, they have made the wrong decision about where and how spending should be reined in. If there are to be any shifts and cuts in the division of revenue, the cuts should come from national government and from bailouts, and the shift should be towards those spheres of government who actually deliver quality of life improvements for the poor. So it is true, Honorable Buthelezi, that this budget, this division is redistributive, as you've just said, but it's redistributive in the wrong direction. It takes from the poor and gives to failing state companies. Provincial governments will suffer a devastating 220 billion rand, honorable members, cut over the next 3 years. This will critically undermine their ability to deliver basic services and do their jobs. The Western Cape alone will suffer a 20 billion rand cut to its equitable share over 3 years, a 4.3 million rand cut to early childhood development, a 30 million rand cut to education infrastructure, Mr. Buthelezi, speaking of the right to education, and a 100 million rand cut to the road maintenance grant. But what of local government? Let's consider the city of Cape Town. Cape Town will suffer an 87 million rand real cut to its equitable share, a 45 million rand real cut in the urban settlements development grant for housing, Mr. Buthelezi, speaking of the right to housing, and an enormous devastating 560 million rand cuts to the public transport grant. Consider now the story of Marilyn, a resident of Strunkfontein here in Cape Town, who relies on public transport to get to and from her job every day. She already pays 140 rand a week for her clip card, 560 rand a month. But when the public transport subsidy goes down, the price of her clip card goes up. She rightly asks a good question. Why should she pay more to get to work every morning so that government can send more of her money to Eskom? Interestingly, the 220 billion rand cut now being inflicted on provinces perfectly matches the 200 billion rand in bailouts that this government has sent since 2000, with another 17 billion rand this year alone. And yet, despite all of this money and higher tariffs and higher taxes, we are told to expect load shedding for at least another 5 years. Show me your budget, sir, and I will show you what you value. And so it is today. Less services for those who need them most, more bailouts for those who cannot get enough. That is why Cape Town and cities like it must realize that they are being dragged down with this failing national government that does not care and will not care. That is why Cape Town and cities like it must break out of the system of entrenched decline and protect their residents from a national government that just doesn't care. By buying their own electricity, laying rail systems, and keeping residents safe with their own law enforcement. And so long as you, national governments, continue to take money from the pockets of good people, like Marilyn, who I spoke of, then we will oppose the division of revenue as we oppose this bill today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The Honorable Ntlangwini.
Thank you, House Chairperson. The EFF rejects Mr. Tito Mbowene's misguided, dangerous, and austerity division of revenue bill. The division of revenue bill is a bill that allocates the revenue raised through taxes and all other revenues nationally between the national, provincial, and local spheres of government. In the current form, the division of revenue bill before Parliament remains a proposal from the Minister of Finance until today, like today, we vote for it in favor or not in favor. By voting in support of this bill, it means we are voting in support on austerities that will cut budgets of service delivery. When we vote against the division of revenue bill, we are not saying the provinces must not receive monies to pay salaries for teachers and nurses. When we vote against this bill, we are not saying municipalities must not receive monies to deliver basic services. We are voting against this bill because it is introducing dangerous austerities that will lead to budget cuts of teachers' salaries, budget cuts of nurses and doctor salaries, and budget cuts of water and sanitation and infrastructure services in municipalities. Members of the ruling party who are here today to toe the line and not to apply independent thinking will come and rehearse written notes that have been written by National Treasury for them. They will ignore all inputs from the Parliamentary Budget Office, the input of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, SALGA, and all of the submissions. The committee, together with the Committee of Labour, Civil Society, and activists, making a mockery of the public commission process, wasting taxpayers' money. But allow us to give you in proper context and display any myth-making by the ruling party. And we do this because there's a campaign of misinforming the public. In this division of revenue bill, the money going to provinces to pay salaries for nurses, doctors, and teachers have been reduced by 205 billion over the medium term. That's a fact, Honorable Hope. Money going to provinces as conditional grants have been reduced to 10.7 billion by Mr. Boweni is reducing the money of HIV, TB, and malaria and communicable diseases outreach grant. That's a fact, Honorable Hope. Money going to municipalities that must deliver electricity to our people and other services is reduced by 14.7 billion, Mr. Hope, as you are howling. We are not making these numbers up. Even the minister is going to come here and tell us that this is not austerity division of revenue bill, and he must explain what government fiscal consolidation is. More fundamental is the division of revenue bill is like with all over fiscal policies, not like to any coherent, coordinated, and practical industrialization strategies. Instead, provinces and municipalities receive these monies and they will not build local markets and they will not support localization, industrialization. Municipalities must be the hubs of industrialization. Municipalities must procure the majority of the goods from local suppliers who produce them locally. Cleaning material, building material, and all other material necessary to deliver basic services. However, if we are going to turn municipalities into hubs of industrialization, we must first address the equitable share that the National Treasury has used continued apartheid facial planning and economics. It's not true that the equitable share favors poor Black people. People cannot continue to tell themselves these lies. And as much they want, the reality is that Black people will continue to sleep with empty stomachs, Honorable Hope, live in overcrowded information settlements like animals and travel long hours of work to work and do not have the time to even raise their kids, Honorable Hope. In the current form, the equitable share allocates only 9% of the total revenue raised nationally. In these numbers, this is 138.5 billion out of the budget and out of 1.8 trillion. But municipalities are supposed to be the code face of service deliveries. Quite facts, Mr. Hope. I hope you read it. Unless we fix this mismatch, we do away with Mr. Boweni's austerities. We are going to vote for this division of revenue that will push the people into poverty and shrink the economy. We will not vote for this right-wing budget. I thank you.
Siyabonga, ma'am. Mhlonishwa, Inkosi Buthelezi.
Honorable Chair, if I may, the Honorable Buthelezi is struggling with connectivity.
Okay, as long as you have agreed, thank you, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I'll also not be tuning in my camera because of the same issue. Now, Chair, the IFP notes that the government's priorities in this difficult financial climate include the promotion of economic recovery and the fiscal consolidation. Now, the IFP noted the impact of the pandemic on what was an already struggling economy and supports the focus on creating high level of economic growth. Now, these efforts, however, depend on the ability of economic actors to bounce back from the lockdown and participate effectively in the markets, as well as the successful rollout of the vaccination program. The IFP also appreciates that in order to buttress these economic recovery initiatives, serious fiscal changes must be made. The IFP welcomes the government's continued commitment in fighting the pandemic via the 8 billion that has been added to the provincial equitable share over the medium term to ensure that provinces can cover the cost of responding to the COVID-19 virus. Further, the IFP notes and welcomes the 2.4 billion allocated to provinces within the HIV, TB, malaria, and community outreach programs, including COVID-19 components of the administration of the vaccine to subsidize service delivery cost. The IFP remains concerned about the status of the corruption and the misuse of resources in this area and across the board. We encourage all departments to view these financial changes with the seriousness they deserve and to remain vigilant against corrupt individuals and entities that seek to derail both our national health and our economic recovery. The IFP wishes to emphasize the importance of a multi-pronged approach in our economic recovery plan, one that is inclusive of rural communities and their traditional leaders. The provision of reliable electricity, water, and sanitation services are at the core and are critical issues that we are battling with and which leaves our most vulnerable communities exposed. Finally, Honorable Chair, the IFP knows the importance of narrowing the budget deficit and stabilizing the debt of the GDP ratio. South Africa finds itself in the precocious position of a poor projected rebound when compared to some of its regional peers. We must tighten our belt and take decisive actions against those who would derail these critical efforts through financial misconducts. Honorable Chair and honorable members, the IFP will support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Vessels.
Point of order,
Oh.
House Chairperson. Thank you, House Chair. Would you be so kind to reprimand Honorable Lewis to put on the mask in the House? Out of order.
Thank you. Honorable Vessels, she heard you.
Agbare huisvoorsitter, dit is onmoontlik om te praat oor die verdeling van staatsinkomste sonder om te praat oor die toestand van plaaslike regering. Elke jaar moet ons dit sê as oppositie. Elke jaar moet ons sê hoe sleg dit gaan in munisipaliteite reg oor die land. We sound like broken records complaining about the fact that there are no service delivery and that local government has collapsed. But it's a very relevant broken record because people are suffering, Chairperson. People are dying, literally dying because of the state of our roads out there. People are dying because of inadequate hospitals and clinics. People are suffering because of sewage works not functioning, because of water interruptions, with towns experiencing nearly 3 years without water in certain parts of the country. 3 years. With electricity cuts and load shedding. And then the solution provided by the governing party and boasted about now is the district development model that will solve everything. Just like the basic back to basic program would have solved everything, but it did not. The district development model will fail because it is more centralization and taking away the service delivery centre from the people. The Deputy President, when he answered questions earlier this week, almost referred to municipalities as being very naughty, not paying ESCOM, and reprimanding them. But who governs those municipalities? Is it people from Mars or Venus or whoever you like? Or is it ANC members, members from your party governing those municipalities? Municipalities owe money to water boards. But about 14 years ago, the Division of Revenue to solve that and address that issue of outstanding debt to water boards. Was that money utilized? No, it was returned to the fiscal. So don't blame and come here, Honorable Buthelezi, and say you are a caring government. And then you say the social hardship and the dire circumstances are created by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not. It was created by yourselves. It was created by the ANC government. Years and years of failures. And neither was it created by apartheid. You scapegoat. And you are the irrelevant broken record. Scapegoating your own failures. Infrastructure is important, Honorable Buthelezi, but money is lost due to underspending of those grants. Underspending. Roads are falling apart. Waterworks aren't working. Money is returned to National Treasury each year because municipalities don't know how to spend. Provinces don't know how to spend.
Take your seat. Yes, Honorable Mlenzana.
I just want to check if the honorable member is ready to take my question.
Honorable Vessels, are you ready for a question?
Chairperson, I don't have time. So.
Thank you.
Money is lost that is supposed to be used for infrastructure due to looting, exploitation by your cadre contractors, and corruption. Apartheid is no more, but the ANC system is the one now not delivering services. The ANC is giving money to the South African Airways, which you destroyed, to the destroyed land bank, but taking money away from early childhood development, taking money away from road infrastructure, taking money away from hospitals, taking money away from those very services that should be delivered to the people. No, you are not a caring government, and shame on you. Shame on you for not prioritizing local government and addressing your own members who are failing the people out there. We need to decentralize, take decision-making closer to the people, service delivery closer to the people, and get rid of failed ANC policies. We need new municipal governance.
Thank you
and
very much.
luckily, at the end
Thank
of this year, people do have the
Thank you,
chance to
Honorable
elect
Vessels.
more
Your time
responsible
is now up. Thank
government.
you.
Thank you.
I'm informed, Honorable Kaban Saba, your hand is up. Is that a point of order? You are on virtual platform. Or is it a mistake? Okay, we proceed. The Honorable Reverend Swart.
Most Reverend. Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, the ACDP appreciates the committee's hard work that has gone into processing the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill under great pressure. We understand and support the central objectives over the 2021 medium-term budgetary expenditure period, which is aimed to narrow the budget deficit and stabilize the debt to GDP ratio. While attempts have been made to reduce the impact of the reduction in provincial and local government allocations, we share the concerns that have been expressed by other speakers from this podium, particularly concerning the impact that this will have on health, on local government services, water, sanitation, and houses. Now, if one looks at the provincial equitable share, that has been reduced by more than 200 billion over the medium term, with direct conditional grants to provinces reduced by a net 10.7 billion for this financial year, and that is a significant figure. Now, so why is this so concerning? Let's just have a look at some of the stats that we are grappling with. As of 31 December, 28,469 COVID-19 related deaths had been recorded. That figure, as we know, is over 51,000, very tragically. During the same year, the whole of the year last year, how many people died of other diseases? According to a response to my question, 443,000 persons died from natural causes. So if you deduct at that stage the 28,000, you are around about more than 415,000 people have died over the year of other diseases. That is almost 30,000 per month, 1,000 per day, every day for a full year. Whilst correctly, there's a lot of focus on COVID-19. We understand that. I last year at this time was tested positive. Very little is said of that staggering figure. And the sad part of those deaths is that many are from treatable diseases, TB, HIV, AIDS, and other chronic diseases, largely treatable. Now, the reduction to provincial equitable share and local government equitable share means that there's less money for hospitals, clinics, nurses, doctors' salaries. And this is a serious concern for each one of us. During the lockdown, many people were not able to access medical facilities for treatment or medication. Correctly, there's a lot of focus on COVID-19. I would urge the Honourable Minister to carefully monitor this aspect going forward, because every life lost, whether it is COVID-19 or another disease, is very severe and we need to avoid it at all costs. The ACDP will regrettably, whilst we understand the sentiment behind this budget, this divisional review, we will not be able to support it. I thank you.
Thank you. UGM, do we have anyone on virtual platform? No, we proceed. The ATM? Okay, good.
Honorable
Oga?
Chairperson,
Yes, proceed.
when there isn't enough money in the bank to buy everything on the shopping list, you are forced to prioritize. Because you cannot buy the meat which is on special if you can't afford electricity to run the fridge. you start budgeting. You ensure sufficient funds are reserved to keep the basic services running, and instead of beef, make do with chicken. The same theory applies to the division of government spending. Addressing the COVID pandemic through vaccinating the nation is our most pressing priority. But at the same time, addressing the basic needs and dignity of our people cannot be abandoned. Indeed, the quality and distribution of state services must be ramped up. We must do both without dwindling purse, while at the same time preventing what precious resources we do have being looted by crooked politicians and officials. It was not just disheartening and disappointing to see these plunderers conniving with private companies to ransack our COVID defenses. It was hideous and deeply disturbing. We need to see those who steal from our people prosecuted and imprisoned. So we must be sure to set sufficient funds aside to keep our criminal justice system going. The burden of spending our tax revenue wisely is not Treasury's alone. It is also our collective responsibility as public representatives and each and every government employee to ensure the resources we have are best spent. That good procurement decisions are made, that the nation gets bang for its buck. Good reiterates its call for the development of resilient and sustainable contract and consequence management systems to hold accountable those who are responsible for administering our accounts. Chairperson, COVID has created unprecedented hardships and challenges. It has highlighted the shocking levels of inequality, both in quality of life and service delivery. It has highlighted our historic failures to get resources to those who need them most. While the vaccination drive is our priority, our people can't eat or clothe their children with vaccines. And spending money on vaccines cannot be an excuse for further lowering of standards of service delivery to poorer communities. The circumstances we are in demand that we be capable of balancing our long-term interests while keeping the nation afloat. Chair, with the vaccine rollout underway, as we're looking beyond COVID, we need good solutions to tackle our enduring challenges with inequality, poverty, and achieving sustainable social and economic justice. It is said that crises create opportunities. Our ability to realize opportunities, however, depends on our fiscal integrity. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, House Chairperson. The National Freedom Party notes the report of the Standing Committee on Appropriations tabled here today. And I want to thank my colleagues and particularly the chairperson in the difficult time that he went, having lost his sister, but he did not. He ensured that he, of course, performed optimally to make sure that we have come today to be able to debate this. But Chairperson, I have some, major concerns. While the purpose of this bill is to try and narrow the budget and stabilize debt to GDP and cut down on non-interest expenditure, my concern is how are we going to be able to achieve this? First of all, we talk about cutting down on public sector wage bill. We're now creating a fourth tier of government by the district model, which means we're certainly not going to be cutting, but we're going to be increasing the cost to the fiscus. Again, once again, the monies are now going to go more towards consumption costs. Now, further than that, we talk about boosting the economy, economic growth. We talk about infrastructure development. And then we are cutting on health. We are cutting on education. We're cutting on social services. We're cutting on safety and security. Given the fact that we know that economic growth in South Africa is at an all-time low, we know that the levels of unemployment has been increasing in the country and we ought to be boosting the economy. But clearly these cuts are not a pro-poor of pro-poor. The poorest, the most vulnerable in the country may have lost their homes. Many of them are going hungry. The number of homeless in South Africa is actually increasing. I see we want to spend more money on informal settlements, where we want to spend money in upgrading rather than providing them with service sites providing them with loans so that they can build their own homes and live with dignity. I'm not sure how long we're intending and want our people to live in informal sectors. So it seems like that, we're moving in obviously the opposite direction. We also have a problem where I know we've got a cut in the urban settlement development grant, but the important thing is that when you allocate monies for these things, people are not spending the money. They don't have the capacity to be able to spend these monies, and this is what is causing havoc. The other problem that we appear to be having is that we're not getting enough of positive outcomes out of the money that we spend in South Africa. The allocations to provincial budget, I think, must also be looked at, because I think a lot of money is being, and is it giving us the outcome that we want in South Africa? Clearly it's not. Maybe it's time to start reducing the number of provinces in South Africa and trying to save some money. Do I still have time? The National Freedom Party very reluctantly will support this division of revenue, but Chairperson, we believe that the time has come for us to work collectively, get back to the drawing board and put in measures so that we collectively can play a role in improving the quality of life of the people in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Honorable Peters. Your minute, as instructed by the Chairperson Buthelezi, has been added. Please proceed. Honorable Peters. Are we winning? Is he there?
Honorable Chairperson,
Yes.
Chairperson, on
Yes,
behalf of the African National Congress, I rise to support the 2021 Division of Revenue Bill. But at the same time, Honorable Chairperson, I just want to indicate to Honorable Hill Lewis that he fully knows quite well that with regard to the monies that has been reallocated from local government and other departments like human settlements, it is because of the underspending in those particular votes. I also want to say it would be important for Honorable Hill Lewis at times to attend the SCOA meetings so that he can benefit from the presentations and information that is being shared there. But I also want to indicate that Honorable Will Lewis is not informing the people of South Africa and the people of the Western Cape that in the Western Cape, instead of them having under expenditure, they'd rather return the money timelessly to the revenue fund. So it means hulle hardloop weg om te gesien te word dat hulle onderspandeer. So dit is 'n manier wat hulle wegsteek dat hulle nie die nodige capacity het nie. So especially in relation to the IPTN, he's making reference to somebody called Marilyn. He must go and tell Marilyn what happened to the transport, the IPTN monies in the Western Cape. Honorable Nkangwini knows quite well what is happening. And I want to say to her, we need to support this proposed budget so that the people of South Africa can continue benefiting from the revenue that is available. In 2 days' time, Honorable Chairperson, South Africa will mark 61 years since the tragic massacre at Sharpeville, where 69 mothers, fathers, and children were brutally murdered, and many others were injured by the bullets of the apartheid government police. As we mark this painful day that we have renamed Human Rights Day, we must never forget that the path to our democracy is littered with the bodies of African people. Conscious of our past, the ANC government is committed to protect through the budget and other means the human rights of our people. Without a doubt, our country and continent are facing deep economic challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on the South African economy and health system. Currently, our country has recorded over 1.5 million confirmed cases and close to 52,000 South Africans have perished in this pandemic. We pay tribute to all our frontline workers, in particular health workers, for being in the front line against this pandemic. We also dip our banners in remembrance of those who have perished in the line of duty. During the 2020-2021 financial year, government responded by allocating 20 billion rand to the health sector, thus enabling it to expand prevention, screening, testing, and hospital capacity to enable the health sector to sustain these activities and respond to possible future waves of COVID-19 infection. This bill allocates an additional 8 billion rand to provincial health departments through the provincial equitable share. As the ANC, we welcome the allocation in the MTF of 29.4 million rand to Tygerberg Regional Hospital and 100 million rand to Klipfontein Regional Hospital in the Western Cape. We are confident that these allocations will be a welcome relief to the poor and working class people in Elsies River, Manenberg, and Guguletu in the very Western Cape that Honorable Lewis was speaking about. Health Services has received 14.2% of consolidated expenditure over the MTF. This is in line with government's commitment to improve the health and quality of life of our people. Honorable members, the African National Congress will never be moved from the belief that, and I quote, access to decent health is a human rights issue, close quotes. It cannot depend on how much you have in your bank, hence our commitment to the national health insurance. This commitment was demonstrated when the ANC government moved quickly to restrict movement and activities since March 2020, and also prepared our health facilities to treat COVID-19 patients. As the president reiterated in the SONA last month, if government had not imposed the hard but necessary measures, the devastation caused by this virus could have been far worse. The work of strengthening the health system must be intensified this year, particularly in provinces.
Honorable Peters,
Like a machine gun.
there is a point of order from the
Honorable
House.
Chair,
Just wait, there is a point of order here. Honorable Hill Lewis, what is it?
No, ma'am. Will Mrs. Peters take a question?
The Honorable Hill Lewis wants to know if you want to take a question.
he must come to the committee.
Thank you very much. Proceed.
The work of strengthening the health system must be intensified this year, particularly in provinces. In this regard, we note that 92% of the 678.7 billion rand of the health budget is allocated to provinces. The capabilities of provincial health departments and facilities must be enhanced to ensure the efficient delivery of services. While the economic challenges may continue in the short term, the objective of building a South African national health insurance must remain the strategic focus of government to resolve the health challenges. That is why government must be commended to protecting the most critical health interventions in this year's budget. A successful rollout of COVID-19 vaccine will support our economic recovery as more sectors such as tourism will open up. The success of the vaccination program will require the unity of one message, many voices by government, business, labor, and civil society. The 678.7 billion rand health allocation must help promote industrialization and localization by boosting the growth of our local pharmaceutical industry and creation of jobs. We are calling on government to ensure that SMMEs, Black business, youth businesses, and co-ops also become the nucleus of this localization process. As the Freedom Charter enjoins us, and I quote, people shall share in the country's wealth, close quote. Let us use government buying power to make this a reality. The ANC commends government for prioritizing health workers in the first phase of the vaccine rollout. The allocation of 2.4 billion rand to provinces for vaccines is an important step towards the direction of resources to where they are needed the most. We also welcome the allocation of 140 million for the creation of for the creation of employment for medical interns. As Parliament, we must make an unambiguous call to the provincial governments that we will not tolerate any wastage of these precious resources. The ANC comments the steady work the Auditor General with the real-time auditing of COVID-19 relief package. The AG's office audited the spending of 145 billion rand allocated through the supplementary budget table in June last year. The disturbing reports of embezzling of funds in the procurement of PPEs, costly field hospital buildings, and unnecessary fumigation of schools are among the activities for which premiers and MECs must exercise oversight and ensure accountability. Those who stole from the sick must face the full might of the law.
Minutes.
We must denounce vaccine nationalism
The time is up. Thank you. With the additional
Thank you.
1 minute.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is IC on the platform? Okay. The PAC? No. Honorable Hendricks?
Our revenue is not enough as the country needs more money to allocate to prevent South Africa from sliding into a failed state and to put a warm plate of food on the table of the poor, as promised by President Ramaphosa in his first State of the Nation address, and which is the first manifesto promise of Al-Jama. So the country must wait until voters put Al-Jama in power. Al-Jama also wants an interest-free state bank, which the Minister of Finance supports. This will put more money in all 3 tiers of government. The country needs a braver treasury to identify the 30% fat in many line items hidden by professionals in the public service. But as President Ramaphosa professionalizes the public service, this will soon disappear. The hard work of the Portfolio Committee has not gone unnoticed, but it is clear that the budget deficit is increasing year to year. The result is that the interest burden is getting bigger all the time. And the country doesn't want to listen to move to an interest-free economy. In order to curtail the budget deficit, government needs to cut down on spending or increase revenue. Increasing taxes is one way of increasing revenue, but there seems to be very little room to increase taxes. 5.8% of the South African population is paying 92% of personal tax and 85% of VAT. We need to broaden the tax base. This can be done by getting more taxpayers into the tax net. There are many informal businesses with big turnovers who are not registered for income tax and VAT. One way of increasing taxes is to have differentiated rates of VAT. Luxury goods such as expensive cars and jewelry can be taxed at a higher rate of VAT, while essential goods and services can be taxed at a lower rate, even lower than the 15% rate. This will allow the wealthy to pay more VAT than the poor, but based on their expenditure patterns. An example and above is that if a wealthy person can afford to buy a luxury car like a Porsche, then he or she can afford to pay a higher rate of VAT on the car. We once again thank the Portfolio Committee for its hard work. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair.
Thank you. Honourable Servan?
Yes. I'd like to thank the ANC Chief Whip for always having solidarity with me for not being the tallest member. I do appreciate it. Madam Speaker, Madam House Chair, it's very difficult to sweep in these debates when you don't know, especially with some of these smaller 1- and 2-seat parties, if it was their own speech or it was faxed to them by Ace Magashule. Especially after Tuesday, what we discovered is a lot of these 1- and 2-seat parties take their orders directly from the General Secretary of the ANC. There's almost no point in responding to what they've said. You might as well just focus solely on the ANC. And what we have seen for the past 3 years is that the ANC has tabled a bailout budget after a bailout budget. They've chosen airlines over infrastructure. They've extended themselves into debt to keep these failing state-owned enterprises afloat, while squeezing taxpayers, ratepayers, and businesses harder and harder year in and year out. And it remains a fact that last year, the state spent more money on an airline that hasn't flown once than it has on vaccines to this date. Now, this year, the Division of Revenue Bill actually shows a fundamental shift away from this bailout budget because they've moved from bailouts to slash and burn. That's a new approach. It's a novel approach, slash and burn, because they've run out of other people's money. Let me explain, Honourable Member over there, please. Hear me out, calm down. Now, slash and burn is because they're slashing funding to provinces that provide healthcare and education. They're slashing funding to local governments at a time when municipalities are failing, to the point that the courts have to step in and tell residents and ratepayers associations to take over services. And of course, we know that they've burned 10 billion rand in the last year on an airline that has not flown once. So slash and burn is all that you have left when you choose radical and extremist pet projects over services and social protection. Provinces are getting 222 billion rands in reductions over the medium term, and the failing local governments are getting 18 billion rand in cuts over the medium term. Even the Fiscal and Finance Commission, mostly appointed by the ANC, has said that these choice of cuts are going to destroy service delivery. And while some cuts to the provincial budgets are based on reductions to the public wage bill, you find that most other cuts are based on the assumption that grants won't go spent. Well, the Western Cape is the only province, as of December 2020, that spent 100% of its human settlements grants. It's the only province that did so. So the provinces that need the cuts are the ANC ones, not all of them. And in fact, if you had competent governments, you wouldn't need to make these cuts. But 329 million is being cut from the municipal infrastructure grants, but I want to get to a very illustrative example on this. Another 21 million is being cut from the municipal integrated development grant. Do you know where this 329 million and 21 million from these grants, the 7 municipalities, are going? They're going to pay for non-returning councillors gratuities. So more than half of the councillors in this country have elected an ANC ticket. And every ANC councillor that failed his or her community and loses their seats will be getting money that should have been used for infrastructure in municipalities. So lastly, let me spend my last 40 seconds on vaccines. Honorable Papo, you can calm down. I'm speaking facts. Just relax. Don't get so heated. We don't need to be heated. We're just speaking facts here. Now, on vaccines, 10 billion has been allocated to provinces for COVID interventions, but only 6.5 billion has been allocated to the health department for vaccine procurements. The Fiscal and Finance Commission has stated that with this budget, the state will not meet to community immunity within the 12-month period as promised. You have not put in enough money for this. So we cannot continue like this. We need growth, we need jobs, we need services, we need vaccines. And for that reason, the DA cannot support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We proceed to the Honorable Taiso.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Mr. Sarupen should have known that the General Secretary of the ANC, Comrade Makashule, is not a member of parliament here in this house. I don't know why do you bring this issue here, very much irrelevant. The division of the revenue bill is focused on the reconstruction and recovery of the South African economy, while at the same time seeking to prevent our country from descending into a sovereign debt crisis. The fiscal framework introduces a number of over the medium term. We must acknowledge that there are risks to our financial. These include the financial positions of public entities and local government that remain weak, partly as a consequence of poor financial management. Parliament, working together with our colleagues in national department and the provincial and local spheres of government, must focus on resolving these challenges. Despite the significant reduction in the allocation of national departments and government shares of the national revenue has risen in relative terms. Local government will receive, for instance, 9.4% of the budget in the 21-22 financial year, and a further 18.9% over the medium-term expenditure framework. Municipalities spend 4.2 billion of a budgeted 11 billion that was added to the local government equitable share last year. In that their needs were sufficiently financed. But there's a challenge on capacity to spend. Nevertheless, in 21-22 financial year, several conditional grants to municipalities will retain provision for COVID-19 related programs to continue supporting these municipalities. While we may differ with our colleagues in civil society on the characterization of the 2 trillion per year budget over the medium term, it is a fact that the majority of the budget goes towards social services. As we know, provinces are responsible for providing social services, including basic education for 13.2 million learners and healthcare for 49.8 million of our people who do not have medical aid. The government provides these services free of charges to the majority of our people, of which the apartheid government that you so cry for did not do anything during that time. However, given the fiscal challenges the country faces, the quality of these services will only improve through the commitment by our patriotic public service rather than massive allocation of funds. These increases to the social grants are relatively modest, and the committee has noted the cries of Abogogo, who are backbone of many families. We have confidence that as soon as the economy has rebounded, it will be possible for the government to provide above inflation increases to social support programs, as it has done for many years. These allocations by government to provide social safety nets to the majority of our people in need are progressive. For instance, government has allocated 1.2 billion to provide to provinces to employ social workers, and an amount of 603 million is allocated to mitigate the social effects of HIV and gender-based violence and substance abuse. As a government that is concerned about the future, a further 3.5 billion is allocated to early childhood development. I would like to add my voice to congratulate Amazing Class of 2020 for doing well under trying circumstances. We congratulate the Minister and the Deputy Minister of Basic Education, MECs, officials, and most importantly, the educators who took risk to provide education to our children. We therefore welcome the fact that education gets 23.5% of the 1.23 trillion of expenditure. A further 36.7 billion is allocated to education infrastructure and maintenance. Per capita, South Africa spends more on basic education than Germany and the US. These allocations benefit 9 million learners at 19,950 schools each year. The government will also allocate 25.5 billion to the National School Nutrition Program grant over the medium-term expenditure. We must recognize that our country is going through a situation similar to what the president of Cuba, the late Commandant Fidel Castro, called a special period. Like Cuban people, we must be prepared to make sacrifices in order to remain a sovereign nation. We must also build a national compact that funding for some of our critical public services will remain sufficient. These include education, research, development, water, supply of electricity, health to our people. We must strengthen the bond of humanity, solidarity, and national unity during this special period of hardship. You continue to enjoy benefits of apartheid. That is why you don't see any necessity for our people to get their lives improved. And from the Honorable, from the Freedom Front Plus, we are not going to do away with the district development model. Whether you call it a warfare or what, it is the way to go now. Apartheid was a dirty social system that you were so used. Even now, you don't see any necessity that our people should benefit from the economy. We should be able to uplift their living conditions. We are not surprised that you all support anything, but this division, this bill will go through, and it will must. The ANC support this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Taiso. We proceed and invite the Deputy Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable members, good morning. This division of revenue allocates 1.8 trillion to be spent by the three spheres of government in the next financial year. Over the next 3 years, after providing for debt service cost, the contingency reserve, and provincial allocation, 48% of the national raised funds are allocated to the national government, and 41.9% to provincial government and 9.4% to the local government. The focus of the
On a point of order, House Chair.
Honorable Deputy Minister, just a minute. Yes, Honorable Nkangwini, what's the point?
We would really like to hear and see the Deputy Minister. We can't see him. Can he just clean, or somebody help him clean his screen so that we can be able to see?
Honorable member, I didn't want to disturb the minister because
No, but
the
what-
Deputy Minister, listen, every time people speak without even their videos on, we don't complain. So we can hear the voice very well. Continue, Honorable Deputy Minister. You were not supposed to be stopped, just that your camera is not clear. That's it. Thank you. Proceed.
Is it clear now?
Better.
Okay, thank you. The focus of the Division of Revenue Bill includes improving the composition of spending by reducing growth in compensation while protecting capital investment that have the potential to grow the economy. Apartheid is gone, but its legacy is still with us. The Division of Revenue acknowledges the legacy of apartheid under development. In response to this legacy, the allocations in this bill serve as a powerful tool for redistribution. It compensates for the lower revenue raising ability of rural municipalities, both in provinces and in municipalities. Provinces are at the core of service delivery and are responsible for providing social services. In 2021-22 financial year, 514 billion is transferred to provinces through the provincial equitable share, and 117 billion is transferred through conditional grants. The budget is not reprioritized in the wrong direction. We've allocated additional 8 billion to provincial health department to deal with COVID. Furthermore, 1.5 billion is allocated to provincial departments of health to administer the COVID-19 vaccine program. Municipalities are at the coalface of service delivery. Despite some reductions to the local government equitable share and direct conditional grants, local government allocations are still the fastest growing when compared with other spheres, particularly as it relates to infrastructure transfer, which grow at 7.3% over the 2021 MTF. This again shows that the budget is not allocated in the wrong direction. We are still concerned, honorable members, about the under expenditure on the conditional grant. In 2019-2020, the under expenditure amounted to 10 billion, which is 31% of the expenditure. We have been doing a lot to deal with this situation. With the support of relevant transferring national officer, the National Treasury is able to support the communities through channeling funds through best performing and capacitated district to assist their various locals. These measures, honorable members, complement the reallocation process, which for many years has both incentivized and assisted fast-moving projects. Through this process, underspending could be curtailed as funds could be moved between municipalities within a district or a province without losing money back to the fiscus. Rather than scaling back on services, this bill provides funding to maintain and expand government services, including, for example, the provision of a free nutritious meal to 9 million learners in the South African schools. It also supports healthcare for 49.8 million people without private medical aid. Upgrades sanitation in over 1,000 schools in 2021-22 financial year. It also extends water and sanitation to approximately 250,000 households each year. Honorable members, government has embraced the district development model, not to increase government bureaucracy, but to ensure that government at all levels works in unison. The district model treats the municipal district and metropolitan spaces as the impact areas of joint planning, budgeting, and implementation to increase the development impact of government. All stakeholders acknowledge the importance of maintenance, yet municipalities struggle to prioritize expenditure insofar as maintenance is concerned. The 2021 budget will expand the municipal infrastructure grant scope to allow for the use of a maximum of 5% of a municipal's allocation to fund activities related to the development of an infrastructure asset management plan. The 2021 budget protects transfers that focus on infrastructure, service delivery, and COVID-19 spending. At the same time, it invests in rebuilding the state capacity and strengthening the foundation of future economic growth and promoting new partnerships through which government improve service delivery and stimulate the much needed economic growth. Thank you, Chairperson.
And Dr. Masondo. That concludes the debate. Are there any objections to the bill being read a second time? If you can register your objections.
House Chairperson, the DA would like to object, and we would also like to call for a division, please.
Thank you. A division having been called, the bells will be rung for 5 minutes to allow the whips to consolidate their numbers. Thank you.
I'm not going to. I just
Am I gonna write? All right, all right. Oh, yeah. I will take down the-
Thank you very much. We are back. Honorable members, the speaker has determined that in accordance with the rules, a manual voting procedure will be used for this division. Firstly, in order to establish the quorum, I would request the table to confirm that we have a requisite number of members present in the chamber, and that I've been informed that is so. Party whips will then be given an opportunity to confirm the number of their members present and indicate if they vote for or against the question. A member who wishes to abstain or vote against the party vote may do so by informing the chairperson. Now, having confirmed that we do have a requisite quorum, we will proceed. Honorable members, the question before the House is that the Division of Revenue Bill be read a second time. The voting will now commence. The doors of the chamber will be locked, and no member will be allowed to enter the virtual platform until the voting is concluded. I will now go to the parties who are ready. The ANC.
Thank you very much, House Chair. ANC physical attendance here in the NA chamber is 30. On their visual platform, the ANC has 178, totaling up to 208. We vote in full support.
Thank you, ANC. The DA.
Thank you very much, House Chair Barotto. In the House, we are 11 members present. Online, we are 57, which gives us a total of 68 members voting completely against.
Thank you, DA. The EFF.
Thank you very much, House Chair. In the House, we are 9. On visual, we are 26, and we are voting against.
Thank you, EFF. IFP.
Thank you, Chair. The 7 of us all on virtual. We're voting for the bill to proceed.
Thank you, IFP. FF Plus.
Thank you, House Chairperson. We are 7 on virtual and 2 in the House. That's a total of 9 against.
Thank you. ACDP.
Thank you, House Chair. We're 2 on virtual, 1 in the House against. Thank you.
Thank you. UGM. Not participating. ATM. Not participating. Good.
Thank you, Chairperson. We've got 1 member on virtual and we're in support.
Thank you. The NFP.
Thank you, Chairperson. In the interest of the poorest of the poor, the National Freedom Party, with 2 members on virtual, supports in favor. I thank you.
Thank you. AIC. Not participating. Co. Not participating. Al-Jama.
1 on virtual, and we vote in favor, Honorable House Chair.
Thank you. Is there somebody? I did not. Thank you very much. Are there any member, is there any member who wishes to abstain or vote differently from their party? None. So the voting session is now closed. Can I confirm that you have matched this according to the numbers given by ICT? Thank you very much. Thank you, honorable members. The outcome of this vote is the no, it's 117, and yes, is 219. The question is accordingly agreed to. Now I'm going to ask the secretary to read the bill a second time.
Division of Revenue Bill.
Thank you very much. The bill will be sent to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. we proceed, and I will ask the secretary to read the third order.
Consideration of Electoral Laws Amendment Bill and of report of Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs on amendments proposed by National Council of Provinces.
Thank you very much. I will now recognize the Honorable Bongo platform.
Thank you very much, House Chair. Members of the House and fellow South Africans, it gives me a great pleasure to table to the House the report on the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs on Electoral Laws Amendment Bill. It is a Section 75 bill, House Chair. It is here for approval by the House. The IEC periodically conducts a review of its laws to ensure that the legislative framework is up to date and is close to any identified loopholes. The objective of the bill is to enhance the existing legislative mechanism by amending a number of pieces of legislation so as to ensure free and fair election in accordance with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. The main objective of the bill is to enhance existing legislative mechanisms and is to provide legislative authorization for innovation in the electoral practices in the country. And it is to align the Electoral Act with the provision of the Protection of Personal Information Act, Act number 4 of 2013. The bill was referred to the NCOP House Chair, to the Select Committee on Security and Justice on the 3rd December 2020 for consideration and report. I must say this, that the House Chair, that after the bill has been referred to the NCOP as another House of Parliament has rigorously engaged with the bill. And having rigorously engaged with the bill, it did write back to the National Assembly and proposed certain amendments, which amendments were presented by the IEC to the National Assembly. The bill, House Chair, was advertised in the 11 official languages. As you know, House Chair, that a technique of decision-making lies in consultation. We have consulted with various stakeholders on this bill, and the submissions that we got from the NCOP and the new proposal that we got from the IEC. The IEC tabled the amendment bill, and the committee agreed to the proposals of the IEC. The Portfolio Committee, having considered the Electoral Laws Amendment Bill and the amendments coming from the NCOP, deliberated and adopted this report. I therefore, House Chair, table this report and request this House to approve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As there is no list of speakers, I now recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you very much, House Chair. House Chair, I move that the bill be passed. Thank you.
The Chief Whip moved that the bill as amended be passed. I will now recognize political parties wishing to make a declaration. The usual times for declaration of votes will apply. The DA.
Thank you, House Chair. In an electoral reform workshop earlier this week, today's opposition parties will be tomorrow's ruling party, and today's ruling party will be tomorrow's opposition party. I say amen to that. Now, as much as we howl, the ANC knows that the writing is on the wall. Despite Ramaphoria, 1.4 million voters turned away from the ruling party in 2019. And in the latest by-elections, the ANC lost 8% of their vote, 10 times more than any other party. This points to a coalition government in 2024. Now, in 2016, briefing Parliament, the IEC specifically raised vigilance on the registration of voters ahead of close elections as a challenge. In that same year, there was a case of registration fraud, an award in Johannesburg, that was uncovered by the DA
who were able to use the ID numbers to trace where the newly registered voters had come from by comparing it to previous voters' rolls. It turned out to be a group from another settlement who had registered in that ward, and the registrations were overturned by the IEC. Now, without these ID numbers, this would not have been possible. So something is deeply wrong when it is pointed out that this legislation to hide digits of the ID numbers on the voters' roll will make it practically impossible to perform oversight over voter registration fraud. And the ANC, under the leadership of Honorable Bongo, who knows a thing or two about fraud, is fine with this. Now, when the DA raises the threat to vigilance over the registration of voters, there's no longer a concern. Have elections become too close? Now, the claim is that personal information on the voters' roll must be protected at all costs, but the voters' full names, address, and birth date will still be given out. Now, we as legislators can have our own opinions, but we cannot make our own facts. We look at the law, Section 32 of the Constitution provides that everyone has the right to access to records held by the state that is required for the protection of any rights. Section 11D further entrenches regular, free, and fair elections as one of the foundational rights of our democracy. If we look back to the court judgment that led to the Political Party Funding Act, the court held that the right to vote and the right to access to information are interconnected. The court further held that Parliament will need to come up with a mechanism that allows disclosure, but this mechanism doesn't need to be complete and automatic. Here, despite the guidance of the court and warnings that this legislation in its final form would lead to donors holding back for fear of victimization, the ANC decided it's fine to share personal details of the donors to the general public for the purposes of democracy. After all, as we've seen at the Zondo Commission, they don't rely on donations, but on state resources. So let's be clear on one thing. The voters' roll does not contain phone numbers. It's not a canvassing database. And the DA agrees that this information shouldn't be available to anyone for any purpose. But the Protection of Personal Information Act comes into effect on the 1st of July. And this, this requires political parties to protect this information in the same way that anybody else. The Act further goes on to state that the constitutional values of democracy and openness requires the removal of any unnecessary impediments to the free flow of personal information, and that the right to privacy is subject to justifiable limitations aimed at protecting other rights and important interests. The fact is, reducing ID numbers serves the purpose of making it next to impossible to track the practice of bussing in voters. Why would you want to stop this oversight? Not a single cogent argument was put forward by the ANC on how a voters' roll provided organizations overseeing elections that would not be shared with the public is such a threat to privacy that the protection of democracy must be sacrificed. The bill does not balance the right to privacy with the right to free and fair elections, and in fact subverts the foundational right to free and fair elections and does not pass constitutional muster. Today, the ANC has a choice. Go against the courts, go against the Constitution, and go against the very Protection of Personal Information Act they claim to be protecting. Pass a law preventing legitimate stakeholders from performing oversight over the voter registration process, or send this bill back for correction. To protect the hard-won vote of each and every South African, or to protect themselves. The DA rejects this bill.
The EFF.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. The EFF notes the amendments in the electoral bill, and it had no problem before with the other clauses. They were more administrative in nature, and also sought to ensure tamper-proofness of the electoral process, such as avoidance of double voting. However, the EFF would have welcomed the fact that the voters' roll can be issued to contesting political parties and adapt, the citizens with full ID numbers, while it can be redacted for other stakeholders who want to use the voters' roll for the purpose of research and statistical analysis. Now, redacting of ID numbers is going to open floodgates for electoral corruption and will make it difficult for our party agents to do oversight work. The voters' roll is key during the electoral process period, and limiting its information is a threat to free and fair election. On the 9th of December 2021 by-election, the IEC presiding officers caught the ANC registering individuals in the wards that they don't belong into. And the EFF party agents caught them by asking them their addresses and verified their identity using the ID numbers with the application of the voters roll. What happens if in a voting station there's a person with a similar birth date? How one will be able to verify that voter? Meaning that a long process of application to the chief electoral officer must be initiated to retrieve all ID numbers, and this will prove to be cumbersome. They say a probability of that happening is very low. However, the possibility is there, and every vote counts. We plead with you to please make the ID numbers, all of them, available for political parties, so that they're able to do proper oversight during the election, the process itself. We are worried about the interest of Amabungan on this matter. They go as far as threatening committee members about the court action so that they can have access to the voters' roll. What election research have they done? Why do they want our information so much? Are they going to do what they did to the CIC, to Julius Malem, to publish our addresses and compromising our safety and that of our families? IEC is warned not to play into the political garage and give rogue elements our private information. The electoral officer needs to publish who's given the voters roll. And if it's not a registered party, they must outline to what extent is the information given. The stealing of the votes by the ANC will come to an end, and the net is closing in. EFF will capture political power to usher in economic freedom in our lifetime by any means necessary. For now, it is using an electoral, the process itself. So don't let us use other means. The victory it is there. It is certain no one can stop an idea whose time has come. Based on the points outlined above, EFF is rejecting this bill. And long live the economic freedom fighters. I thank you.
The IFP.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Chair, today the Electoral Law Amendments Bill is before us and was passed in a hurry at the end of last year by this very House and is now back from the NCOP because of the initial public participation process followed by the Portfolio Committee had some serious shortcomings. It is against this background, Honorable Chair and Honorable Chair of the committee, this background that the IFP wishes for the following serious concerns noted by the House. The INC itself has admitted that had they persisted on denying access to voters' roll in its entirety to political parties, independent candidates, the media and civil society, even with the relevant security measures, the bill would have been considered unlawful. And I want to say this again, to have considered unlawful. We therefore specifically welcome the access to the voters' roll for civil society and researchers, as this will assist in an oversight and accountability. It is, however, regrettable that the IFP raised these concerns, among others, at the beginning of the process and during the last debate on this amendment bill. Were labeled agents of investigative journalism's organization, and insults were even hurled at us, Honorable Chair and Honorable Chairperson of the committee. Yet when the very same issue was raised by the NCOP, they were considered seriously. Had our concern had been noted, there would have been no extension of the process to the detriment of the public. I wish to urge this House, honorable members, to view this as a learning curve and that in the future, that we engaged in good faith in a wide consultation process in the public interest, as in our mandate. The IFP wishes to emphasize that without access to the complete voters' roll for political parties, it would be practically impossible to execute effective oversight. The detection of voters' roll, for example, becomes difficult without access to ID numbers. Electoral fraud has been an issue in the past, and as we approach the upcoming local government elections, it will be an issue once again. Voter fraud, where people are being passed into VDs in hotly contested ward, can only be detected by using the full IDs and comparing them to the previous voters' roll. Therefore, let me put this on record. The IFP is in full support of the proposal of the amendments made by the Honorable Rose in the Portfolio Committee have allowed for the registered political parties and independent candidates contesting the elections to have access to the voters' roll, including ID numbers. These proposed amendments should have been accepted. Of course, political parties will not only be allowed to make this data publicly available, and therefore will be no privacy issues. Effectively, the bill before us has now removed the ability of political parties to detect voter registration fraud, and this must be of grave concern to all of us. Furthermore, the IFP appeals to the IEC that adequate internal capacity is made available together with the requisite mechanism in order to ensure that this access to the voters' roll is not open for abuse. The IFP trusts that the IEC will be able to monitor compliance, investigate, fine, or prosecute speedily when there is non-compliance. The IFP had already supported this bill at the NDP and so on, and will continue to do that. Thank you, Chair.
The FF Plus.
Achtbare huisvoorzitter, die Vryheidsfront Plus is besorg oor die vermoë van die Departement Binnelandse Sake om sy mandaat te voldoen. En veral waar dit dan gaan oor die departement oor hierdie wetswysiging moet uitvoer, asook die skryf van die nuwe kieswet wat in 2024 in werking gestel moet word. Dis in talle debatte in hierdie huis al uitgewys dat die departement ernstige probleme het, kapasiteitsprobleme en werklik waar nie aan sy mandaat kan voldoen nie. Daarom is die VF+ ook bekommerd dat daar nie voldoen kan word aan die departement se mandaat om 'n oorsigrol te speel oor die verkiesing en oor die rol wat die OVK moet speel met die implementering van hierdie wet nie. Die party het ook 'n probleem daarmee dat daar nie voorsiening gemaak word vir die oorsigrol wat partye moet speel met betrekking tot die ID-nommers soos wat vir ons vorige sprekers uitgewys het. Die party het ook verder 'n probleem daarmee dat die onafhanklike verkiesingskommissie en die departement nie gaan hou by hofbevele wat gegee is nie en daarom gaan die party nie hierdie wetswysiging ondersteun nie. Dankie voorsitter.
The ACDP.
Honourable House Chair, in considering this Electoral Laws Amendment Bill, the ACDP is acutely aware of the dichotomy which exists and the need to balance the polarized positions. On the one end of the scale is the right of access to information, and on the other, the right to privacy. Clearly, there is a legitimate concern that providing unfettered access to the voters' roll could open the door to identity theft and the abuse of personal information. On the other hand, however, restricting access to the voters' roll could call into question whether the elections were indeed free and fair, open and transparent, as these concepts are non-negotiables in the pursuit of democratic elections. The ACDP understands the urgency to have this amendment bill passed with local government elections expected to take place later this year. However, urgency must not become expediency, which undermines our democracy, causing the legitimacy of the outcomes of an election to be questioned. The principle of redaction and the restriction of access to information on the voters' roll to stakeholders such as the media and civil society organizations, while it has some merits, will place impediments before these stakeholders, thus limiting their role as watchdogs and potentially or very likely making an election outcome unlawful or unconstitutional. There should be no redaction of ID numbers on the voters' roll for political parties. The ACDP notes that according to the Lawyers for Human Rights, there are some 15 million stateless people in South Africa, with 3 million under the age of 18. The vast majority of these go undocumented, having no access to essential services and becoming vulnerable and subject to abuse. As we prepare for local government elections, statelessness, undocumented individuals, and the lack of queue management at the Department of Home Affairs are some of the challenges highlighted in the Portfolio Committee that need resolution so as not to preclude legitimate citizens from the democratic electoral process, while simultaneously ensuring that illegitimate individuals are not included. While the ACDP understands the need to protect personal information, the redaction of digits of identity numbers on the voters' roll will indeed lead to electoral fraud and make the outcomes of elections questionable. This is completely undesirable and should not happen in a constitutional democracy. The ACDP does not support the Electoral Laws Amendment Bill. Thank you.
UDM. The UDM. ATM. Hood. The NFP. The
Thank you, House Chair, and good morning to members. The electoral laws, yes, Chair. I am audible.
Please
Chair, House
proceed.
Chair. Thank you. The Electoral Laws Amendment Bill, intended in part to protect voters' personal information, will restrict access to the voters' roll and the information contained on it. The gains are negligibly compared with the cost, a potential threat to democracy itself, writes the Daily Maverick. We have seen many democratic states struggling with the transition of power after elections due to the lack of transparency of voters' roll. The new clause in the bill, which is Clause 8, is the most problematic as we learned through the public hearings. It is problematic because it seeks to delete Section 16 sub 2 of the Electoral Act, which currently allows members of the public to obtain a copy of their voters' roll on payment of a fee. Secondly, it seeks to grant the Chief Electoral Officer a wide discretion to redact personal information from the vision of the voters' roll provided to political parties and independent candidates, as may be necessary for the protection of the personal information of voters against unreasonable disclosure. The public seems to believe that this is problematic because whether through error or willful abuse, there are many ways that the voters' roll can be inaccurate, where deceased persons are not removed from the roll, where there are duplication or omission of registered voters, or where voters are recorded in incorrect voting districts. It is in the public interest that discrepancies are discovered, corrected, and reported on. But it is not just officials of the IEC who seek to unearth voter fraud. Various stakeholders in the economy also collect and analyze information about elections, enabling them to expose anomalies. This cannot be done without proper, meaningful access. Why then do the powers that seek to alter 2-decade-old provision of the Electoral Act to reduce access? The reason provided by IEC officials at meetings of the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs is that voters' personal information must be protected from misuse. The voters' roll would not work without voters' personal information. This includes their full names, identity numbers, and in the case of the version of the voters' roll provided to political parties and independent candidates, physical addresses. The IEC is concerned that access provision enable unscrupulous persons to use this information for purposes unrelated to elections, although no specific examples of this were provided. By IEC said that they had engaged with the information regulator who administer the Protection of Personal Information Act about these concerns. The results appears to be Clause 8. The reasoning in relation to the
expired.
Thank you, Chair.
So, the PAC, Al-Jamaa.
Thank you very much, Honorable House Chair. Al-Jamaa reminds the House that in South Africa we are in a new abnormal. If honorable members want a summary of what is the new abnormal, they're welcome to contact Al-Jamaa, who is at the forefront of the cyber civilization. Although it is which Honorable Suriman calls a small party, taking instructions from the SG of the governing party. That is so very, very short of the truth. Our request is that more must be done to introduce postal votes. In America, 50 million voters use postal votes, and court action after court action could not vilify postal votes. I have confidence in the Minister of Communication that she will turn around the post office to accommodate postal votes for our elections. It is time to bite the bullet and not to worry about voter fraud and all the issues that we've heard today, but parties must win the support of voters to get more votes like Al-Jamaa, whose votes are tripling at each election. Thank you very much, Honorable House Chair.
The ANC.
Enkosi Sihlalo, ukhongolose ungenela ukuma sithi siyawuxhasa lo mthetho kwaye sizawuqhuba nawo. In 2001, shortly after the term of his presidency, former President Nelson Mandela Dalibunga said The Constitution of South Africa speaks of both the past and the future of South Africa. It permits us to build a nation based on the democratic values of human dignity, equality, freedom through constitutionalism, and the rule of law. It describes the mechanisms and institutions which we have created to achieve this. The Independent Electoral Commission is one of such institutions. The importance of the IEC cannot be overemphasized. It is one of the key ingredients for a proper functioning democracy based on the will of the people. Having been passed in the National Assembly ngo-2020, lo mthetho sidilisha ngawo apha namhlanje we-Electoral Amendment Bill wagqithiselwa kwi-NCOP njengoko indlela esiqhuba ngayo isitsho. Public submissions were received when the bill was introduced. In consultation between the IEC, the information regulator, and the parliamentary legal services, two sections, Section 16 and Section 47 of the Electoral Laws Amendment Bill were redrafted. Section 16 relates to the publication of the voters' roll. The amendment to Section 16 included the deletion of subsection 2. This provision in the Electoral Act placed an obligation on the Chief Electoral Officer to release a segment or copy of the voters' roll when the prescribed fees have been paid. Essentially, the National Assembly had challenges with the clause because it allowed, and this is very important, for unfettered access to the voters' roll by people even if it is not required for electoral purposes. So you could have fraudsters wanting this unfettered access. Instead of opting for the deletion as approved by the NA, the NCOP led by the ANC decided to reinstate this clause but limit right of access to those wanting to monitor the voters' roll for election purposes, or those wanting access for statistical or research purposes, or for any other prescribed purpose. The NCOP led by the ANC opted for this choice to strike a balance between the safeguarding on the one hand of the voters' personal information and the access on the other hand to the voters' roll by parties or stakeholders with a legitimate interest, and to contextualize the redrafting of the clause. I-NCOP ke ithe yawuthetha loo nto as ikomiti ye-NA sathi no siyaniva siyavuma sizapha kule ndlu kuze sithi vumani nani intle le nto. The Constitution provides that every citizen is entitled to free and fair elections that are held regularly. This, as the IEC submitted, is intrinsically linked to being able to verify the correctness of the voters' roll. They further submitted that the principle of minimality has been endorsed by the Protection of Personal Information Act by requiring that only the necessary information be disclosed. The insertion of Section 16, subsection 5 will enable people to verify whether the voters' roll is constitutionally qualified, in that only South African citizens older than 18 years are registered as voters. Amendments to Clause 16, subsection 5 clarifies the personal information that must be redacted on the voters' roll, meaning the date of birth and the last 3 digits of your ID will appear on the voters' roll, but the middle digits of your ID number will be redacted. Kamanye amazwi uba unguRichard Dyanji, i-last digits zakho ngu-081, ifihlwe enye into. Punitive measures have also been emphasized in that any unlawful processing of personal information would be subject to a punishable offense, a fine, or 1-year imprisonment. The proposed amendment further clarifies that the CEO may disclose additional digits of the voters' roll in exceptional circumstances and on an argument made that exceptional circumstances exist. E.g., there may be allegations of fraud if 2 voters have the same name or initials and date of birth, or if there is a prima facie case of fraud, and in which will be determined on a case-by-case basis by the electoral officer, while taking into account that doing so will not involve the unlawful processing of personal information as required ngulomthetho okuthiwa nguPOPI, Protection of Personal Information Act. Clause 20 amends Section 47 of the Local Government Municipal Electoral Act of 2000. This is the technical drafting amendment that brings the bill in line with Section 38, subsection 8 of the Electoral Act, so as to create a consistency on how voters without addresses, and this is very important, on the voters' roll cast their ballot votes on voting day. This country is full of many of those voters, where there are no street names, and we think this is very important. In conclusion, Chair, this bill is a reflection of a vibrant democracy. In order to maintain its vibrancy and facilitate its maturation, it is crucial that from time to time, Parliament intervenes through legislative measures to enhance mechanical aspects of elections. The Electoral Amendment Bill is one such. Mandingene ke kwaba babegqiba uthetha. Ndiye phaa kwi-DA uRose. Xa besine workshop, the veteran of this movement, Uvali Musa, made a very dynamic statement, which can only be made by members of the ANC and veterans, that says today's government can be tomorrow's opposition. Uruoske uithathe literally that thing, because we end the declaration and miss the point that you have to work to win any election.
Thank you. Honorable members, are there any objections to the motion as moved by the Chief Whip of the majority party that the bill as amended be passed? Are there any objections?
House Chair Frolick, please note the objection of the Democratic Alliance.
Objection is noted.
Can you please note the objection of the EFF?
EFF.
Please note the objection of the EFF plus.
EFF plus.
And the ACDP, thank you.
ACDP. Are there any other objections? Are there any other objections? There's no further objections. Those objections are noted. And the bill as amended is thus agreed to. The bill will be sent to the President for assent. The Secretary will read the fourth order.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services on provisional suspension from office of Magistrate K. Bodlani and Acting Regional Magistrate at Umlazi, terms of Section 13(3)(b) of Magistrates Act 1993, number 19 of 1993.
I now recognize the Honorable Magwanishe.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson and honorable members. The Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services, having considered the Minister's report dated 21 July 2020, referred to it on 23rd July 2020, informing Parliament of the provisional suspension from office of Magistrate K. Bodlani and Acting Regional Magistrate at Umlazi in terms of Section 13, subsection 3(b) of the Magistrate Act 1990 of 1993 report as follows. Ms. Bodlani was appointed to the office of Magistrate on the 1st of October 1996 and has been acting in the Regional Court of Umlazi, KwaZulu-Natal as an aspirant Regional Magistrate on probation since 4th November 2013. On the 5th of April 2019, having received and considered a number of complaints against Ms. Bodlani, the Magistrates Commission's Ethics Committee resolved to conduct a preliminary investigation in terms of Regulation 26, subsection 1 of the Regulations for Judicial Officers in the lower courts of 1994. It further did a quality assurance assessment and all the cases that Ms. Bodlani had finalized over the past year or so. The investigation was conducted by a regional magistrate and the judicial quality assessment by an experienced magistrate. The allegation of misconduct directed against Ms. Bodlani are that she, amongst others, sent email messages to a number of her peers which contained racial remarks, allegations of racism, and allegations of favoritism against the acting regional court president and one of her colleagues. On several occasions, she sent out email messages making derogatory and insulting comments about a colleague at the Umlazi courthouse. The email messages were copied to several persons as well as to the Magistrates Commission. She also presided in a case of the state versus Mboisa, where she made derogatory, sexist, and uncalled for remarks and displayed prejudicial conduct towards the accused. The judicial quality assessment of Ms. Bodlane's work revealed serious irregularities and obvious shortcomings, that a number of her cases had to be sent on special review in terms of Section 304, subsection 4 of the Criminal Procedure Act of 1977, as having several serious shortcomings and having imposed incompetent sentences. Ms. Bodlane's mentor advised that her mentorship took about 6 years. This was due to her failing to supply him with enough judgment to prepare her evaluation report to the Commission in time. On the 28th January 2020, Ms. Bodlane was invited in writing to show cause why the Commission should not recommend to the Minister that she be provisionally suspended from office pending the outcome of an investigation into her fitness to hold office of magistrate. Having due regard to the serious nature of the allegations, the totality of the information at hand, and Ms. Bodlane's representation, the Commission resolved to recommend that she be provisionally suspended from office. The Minister, on the advice of the Commission, decided to provisionally suspend Ms. Bodlane with immediate effect, pending the outcome of an investigation into her fitness to hold office as acting regional magistrate, and has submitted a report dated 21 July 2020 for consideration by Parliament. Having considered the report dated 21 July 2020, referred to it on the 23rd July 2020 on the provisional suspension from office of Ms. K. Bodlane, an acting magistrate at Umlazi, KwaZulu-Natal, pending an outcome of an investigation into her fitness to hold office of magistrate. The committee recommends that the National Assembly confirms Ms. Bodlane's suspension from office of magistrate. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I will now recognize political parties wishing to make a declaration. Order, Honourable Members. I will now recognize political parties wishing to make a declaration. The usual times for declaration of votes will apply. The DA.
Chairperson, we do not wish to make a declaration. We are in complete support of the recommendation as read out.
Are there any declarations from the other political parties? The EFF.
Can I start? Person, the Magistrate Court represents perhaps the most important avenue through which ordinary people exercise justice. It is at the Magistrate Court that the most people will ever see a court of law. It is crucially important that the appointment of magistrates must be subject to a very thorough process to ensure that those who are assigned cases of ordinary people on a daily basis are up to the task. The allegations of incompetence and sheer disregard for the law leveled against Magistrate Koleka Bodlane are difficult to fathom. Insensitivity and disregard to the victims of rape is disturbing, in particular for a woman magistrate who should have a better understanding of what women have to go through in this country. In one case, she acquitted a rapist because the rapist carried a bag, styled his hair, and did his own laundry. And according to Ms. Bodlane, they were characteristics of a person who was gay, not interested in women, and therefore could not rape. She has subject various young girls and women who had been raped to incomprehensible trauma in court, where these women were supposed to be given a fair hearing. The High Court judges who reviewed their judgment labeled them incorrect for incompleteness, incompetent, outrageous, disturbing to the extreme, shockingly inappropriate, and completely contrary to the very factors relevant to the sentence. As the EFF, we do not take lightly the removal of a person from their job, particularly Black women, unless there are compelling reasons to do so. Ms. Botlani has defiled her supposedly noble profession and subject to many Black women to untold trauma. She must be removed from office and be kept as far away from adjudication anything in future. We are in support of this report. Thank you.
The IFP.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Our judiciary remains the ultimate democratic check and balance, bastion and guardian of the rule of law. The judges, magistrates, prosecutors, and officials that fill the department's benches and court administration rooms must at all times be beyond reproach. If our justice system fails, the rule of law fails. Within its ranks and collegially, the same high standards of beyond reproach conduct must be expected and enforced, if not complied with, by judicial officials. In the matter before us, we have the suspension from office of Magistrate K. Botlani, an acting regional magistrate at Umlazi, in terms of Section 13.3b of the Magistrates Act. After numerous complaints were received by the Magistrates Commission, ranging from ill discipline and misconduct with peers to allegations of judicial misconduct in handling of certain trial matters and failing to maintain good and accepted order in court, the use of the derogatory remarks, outright partisanship displayed during court proceedings, as well as failing to comply with direct orders from the acting regional court president, together with a number of irregularities ascertained from a judicial quality assessment of Magistrate Botlani, it was recommended that Ms. Botlani be suspended. Given the gravity and number of wide-ranging allegations of misconduct, the IFP supports the report and recommendation. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. The FF Plus.
Thank you, House Chairperson. House Chairperson, the Freedom Front Plus is in support of the report and also the recommendations by the committee. But Chairperson, I want to react to the Honourable Aris. It is appalling that everything is made about race. This is not an issue about race. It is about merit. And let us discuss and debate issues with regards to merit. When there is wrong actions, let's take action against those persons, regardless of race and regardless of your narrow-mindedness to focus on race. We are in a society where we should build a future together, regardless of race, and where we need equal opportunities for all. I thank you.
The ACDP. Order, honourable members.
Thank you, House Chair.
Order, honourable members.
House Chair, the ACDP supports the report. And when one has regard to the serious nature of the allegations, the totality of the information received, and of course, Ms. Botlani's representations, one then sees more than enough evidence for a provisional suspension pending disciplinary action investigation. And whilst one does not prejudge the issue, what was disturbing is that a number of sentences that the magistrate imposed in the sexual offences matters were set aside by judges on review. And this, of course, results in a miscarriage of justice, particularly at a time when there's the scourge of gender-based violence. So we are of the view that the existing evidence is of such a serious nature as to make it inappropriate for the magistrate to perform her functions at this time, and therefore we support the committee's recommendation of suspension. I thank you.
Thank you. The UDM. ATM. Good. The NFP.
Thank you, Chairperson. The National Freedom Party supports the report tabled here today. Honorable Chairperson, the allegations made against Magistrate Ms. K. Bodlani are quite serious, from racial remarks, allegations of racism, favoritism, 18 cases under review at any given time, suspending a rapist, giving a rapist a suspended sentence for a 6-year-old girl that was raped. I think some of the decisions that were given by this particular magistrate leaves a lot to be desired, and I think it is only fair, based on the investigation that has thus far been conducted, that she be suspended. We are quite satisfied that the processes that are being followed are correct, that the outcome of the investigations thus far deems it necessary that she be put on provisional suspension pending the finalization of this matter. The National Freedom Party supports it. Thank you very much.
The AIC, COPE, PAC, Al-Jama, the ANC.
Thank you, Chairperson. The ANC rises to support the report of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services on this provisional suspension from office of Magistrate K. Bodlani. Amongst the serious allegations and irregularities that were cited, they include, despite the availability and readiness of the parties to a case, she postponed the case without just a cause for the postponement of the case against the principle laid down in the Judicial Case Flow Management Directives, and in another case, granting a postponement on unreasonable ground, indicating in writing on several occasions that she would not comply with an order duly given to her by her judicial head of office and the acting regional court president of KZN to furnish the latter with various case records and her reasons to be sent on special review in terms of Section 304, subsection 4 of the Criminal Procedures Act. In so doing, challenging the authority of the acting regional court president to give her official and work-related instructions. But further, she continued to impose incompetent sentences, disregarding the procedures prescribed by sections of the CPA and making nonsensical findings as against those prescribed by the Criminal Procedures Act and case law, not following provisions of the CPA as it relates to child witnesses. And in many cases where the Child Justice Act of 2008 was applicable, the provisions of the Act were not complied with by the magistrate. The investigating officers informed the regional court president and the commission accordingly and suggested that the commission should also consider conducting an investigation into Ms. Bodlani's capacity to carry out her duties of office efficiently. Last year, the president referred to gender-based violence as a second pandemic in the country. Ms. Bodlani's judgment on GBV-related matters, especially those involving children, are gravely concerning. Magistrates and judges play a crucial role in eradicating the scourge of GBV in South Africa. In a country where GBV and other related atrocities are rife, survivors should not feel that justice system has failed them. Decisions by the courts should be rational and take into consideration the prevalence of GBV and its effects on survivors. In the interest of justice, the ANC supports this report, but want to move further that one must deal with the systemic issues of how many of these suspensions are delayed and they take too long for conclusion. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Members, are there any objections to the adoption of the report of the committee, including the recommendation that the provisional suspension from office of Magistrate K. Bodlani be approved? Are there any objections? No objections, agreed to. I now invite the Honourable Ntombela to preside over the rest of the sitting and the last item as the Secretary reads the last order of the day.
Thank you, Chair. The Secretary will read the last order of the day.
Debate on Human Rights Day, promoting human rights in the age of COVID-19.
Thank you very much. I now invite the Honorable N.S. Buthelezi from the ANC.
Honorable Tombela, according to the speakers list. The first speaker on the list is the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land Reform.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't made a mess of it. The first speaker on the platform will be from the ANC, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform.
House Chairperson, honorable members, good morning. I want to quote the words of Mayor Charlotte Maxeke when she said, "This work is not for ourselves. Kill that spirit of self and do not live above people, but live with them. If you can ride, bring somebody with you," close quote. Our collective response as a nation to the pandemic confirmed that as a nation, and most importantly, as public representatives, we understood that serving our people is not about ourselves, but about those who elected us to those corridors of power. The way our government intervened in saving lives and livelihood ensured that as a nation, we're cushioned from the worst, working together with social partners to imagine the reconstruction and recovery plan is evidence that yes, this work is not for ourselves, but for those who have the honor to serve. Some among us have lost employment. Yes, we lost our freedoms to do what we like, but we chose solidarity and cared for others who are most vulnerable than us. It is this spirit of Ubuntu that we must continue to emulate in leading through this pandemic. The volunteers who offer their services to work with the Department of Basic Education in assisting our 2020 matric students made it possible for them not to lose an academic year. The farmers and farm workers who ensured that our right to food is less compromised must be appreciated for their effort. This commemoration of Human Rights Day comes on the heels of the International Women's Day, whose theme was, I quote, "Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World," close quote. There is no greater threat to humans than the threat of living as presented by COVID-19 today. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only disrupted our economies and our livelihood, it has increased the burden of care for women as wives, as workers, and as leaders. It has also increased gender-based violence in our homes. Organizing homes as new centers of work had an impact on domestic work, who had to continue to offer the much needed service of home care. In reimagining our future during and post-COVID-19 pandemic, how do the experiences of women inform decision-making? Praising them for the role they have played and continue to play as frontline workers and essential services, it's important. However, their roles in leading scientific research, as managers, as public representatives, as leaders, must be recognized and not relegated to the tail end. Dr. Tozama April, in her doctoral thesis, Theorizing Women, had this to say about our view of Mama Maxeke. I would like to quote, "A simplistic view of Maxeke as an iconic representation of women in the formative years of the 20th century struggles failed to account for her theorization of every day. Maxeke's doubling theorization of the native question presented a mode of analysis to the workings of liberation politics. It is like the mode offered by Pearson. Maxeke's ambiguity calls on us to engage with her as both a celebrated and a neglected figure. It pushes us beyond the limits of linear progression of political biographies as it raises questions about gender in one of Black protest politics in South Africa in a substantive way that takes into account the production of ideas and thought. Maxeke's own theorization of the everyday work on what she called, I quote, African womanhood. The living conditions of Africans in urban areas, the plight of young girls found destitute in urban centers of Johannesburg, juvenile care, education and employment of Africans in urban centers transcend such reductionist view of women in history. She created an aura through which a name continues to resonate, and she discovered deep consequential meanings about life. Dr. April therefore reminds us of the important role of how histories of women must reflect their role, their influences which bring about social change. There is a worrying sense that significant social capital, critical for our people's resilience against the long-standing challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, may be corroded by this crisis as presented by the pandemic. At the center of this holistic role of the African women, as envisaged by Mama Maxege, this could particularly be devastating for the already vulnerable communities where resilience plays a crucial role for their subsistence. This possible corrosion of social capital has the potential of weakening human capacities required in human rights. This includes the capacity for people to cooperate in order to produce food in rural and peri-urban areas where people continue to wisely pool resources and join hands to help each other avoiding hunger. Sickness, deaths, and the accompanying fear can break the bonds of vukuzenzele. This idea of riding with others Mama Maxege referred to may actually be compromised. It can weaken these networks of social resilience. This is why it is important that we must continue to work together across society, not just to provide relief, but also to support people stand on their own feet by helping them prevent the collapse of vukuzenzele networks. Agriculture for many of our people is not some technical world, but it is the very culture and way of life. What happens to food systems and social capital has direct rights and dignity of these people. Standing on one's also requires equitable access to national resources. The quest for land, for agriculture, for livelihoods, for settlement, for even spirituality, it's about building capital assets for those who are poor and those who have been historically disadvantaged. And therefore, the call of equitable access to land is a human right in its own self. Government continues to work hard to strengthen the food systems of social resilience, including indigenous practices of Litsima in Ilima, because they are not just crucial economic activities, but they build social bonds needed greatly during these hard times. So indeed, COVID has reminded us that this work is not for ourselves. It has also reminded us that we need not kill that spirit of self and we need to kill that spirit of self and not live above our people, but live with them. Mama Maxege's idea that if we can ride this storm, if we ride the long-standing waves of poverty and inequality, if we ride the storm of despair, we need to do so while bringing someone with us. And this is a call of our time too. We need to do it now and not wait for tomorrow. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. The next speaker is the Honorable N.K. Sharif, the TA. Honorable Member.
Honorable House Chair, I'm just waiting for my time to be reset. Thank you, House Chairperson. A year of lockdowns disrupting lives and livelihoods caused by COVID-19 and the incompetence of the ANC government that are taking away many of our liberties and freedoms. The Bill of Rights affirms that the state must respect, protect, and promote the rights of citizens. I say this with my chest. The ANC has and continues to fail miserably in upholding and protecting the lives of South Africans. In fact, it is the ANC government that continue to infringe, threaten, and undermine the rights of citizens. The DA is doing a national oversight tour on the effects of GBVF interventions by the useless Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities. During these oversights, it is clear that the ANC government is leaving people behind. This is evident when tracking the state of victim empowerment rooms like Joe Burton Police Station in the Northwest, with only one VEP room that needs to cover roughly 600,000 citizens. This means difficulties in assisting more than one victim and longer waiting periods for reporting violent crimes against women and children. This is where the ANC government fails to protect human rights and ensure the safety of its citizens. Tutuzela care centers are indicative of the failures of the ANC in protecting the rights of women. TCCs play an integral role in getting all the necessary services in one place when reporting GBVF. Some of the best frontline workers at TCCs and work under extremely difficult conditions. From having to wait long periods for DNA rape kits because police have to look for them, to delays at getting evidence back from DNA labs that take up to 9 months and sometimes even longer. Examples were found when the DA visited the Tepong TCC and the TCC in Umlazi, respectively. It is imperative that TCCs procure their own rape kits as police stations and FCS units are failing. TCCs are doing the most under an incompetent state with huge delays because of the inability of the ANC government to manage COVID-19. The lack of debriefing of GBF frontline workers for secondary trauma, as well as having a lack of security, especially at night, is detrimental to the mental health of frontline workers. There is a lack of transport for survivors at the Umlazi TCC to come back for follow-up consultations, prep, and checkups. It is only in an incompetent state where a BMW is given to an organization that already has 3 cars, and the TCC down the road has none. Women are forced to pay up to 120 Rand for travel while this car is collecting dust. Disgusting. And again, proves my point that the ANC is complacent in the perpetration of violence against women. With every province the DA visits, it is more evident that the ANC government does not value human rights and its interventions are not working. I said what I said.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Mentor from the EFF, the next.
No.
Asbong. Slalo, we are here today faced with the reality of an increasingly repressive government, of a failing economy of millions of Black people without employment, of millions more without their land. We are faced with the reality of the continuation and entrenchment of a system of Black oppression and exploitation designed by the British colonial regime, implemented by the Dutch apartheid system regime, and now maintained by the ANC neo-colonial regime. And we must draw the line between us, the people, and this unbroken continuation of African oppression from colonial times to this day. when thousands of African people heeded the call by the president of the Pan-Africanist Congress, Tata Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe in 1960, to reject the Dompark system and reclaim their rights as citizens of this country, the racist apartheid regime responded with a brute force, killing 69 people of unofficial records and many more in reality. At that time, Comrade Sobukwe called on the African people to take their liberation into their own hands because they had no one else but themselves. He drew the line between the people and the economy and also the enemy, and emphasized that there was nothing of common interest between the people and their oppressors. He famously said, they are fighting to entrench an outworn, anachronistic, vile system of oppression. We represent progress as the people. They represent decadence. We represent the fresh fragrance of flowers in the bloom. They represent the rancid smell of decaying vegetation. We have the whole world on our side. We have history on our side. We will win. Chairperson, today, we're still faced with the remnants of the apartheid regime that simply refuses to die, represented by the former liberation movement, now in government, the ANC. When mine workers in Marikana demanded a living wage, ANC government responded with mowing them down. 34 of them died, and injuring thousands more, leaving behind widows and tens of orphans. When Andri Statane and his community protested for service delivery, ANC government responded by pumping his body with bullets, sending him to an early grave. When Sikosipi Bazooka Hadebe stood up for the rights of his community in Kolobeni, this ANC government, in collaboration with the foreign mining companies, assassinated him. When young people demanded free quality education as promised to them by the Freedom Charter of the ANC government, led by Mr. Zuma and Mr. Ramaphosa, responded with brutal violence against the children right yesterday in Braamfontein. Many of those students were expelled from universities and now are forming part of the unemployed. Many more were arrested and now have criminal records. Leaders like Mqabo Dlamini cannot even practice the law they studied for because they have a criminal record for fighting for the rights of young South Africans and young African people to have education. Over 12 million are unemployed. We have government leaders who believe that more austerity measures and retrenchment of thousands of workers from the public service is a solution. What a shame. We have hundreds of thousands of young people who are sitting at home because they are excluded from universities. But we have a communist minister of higher education who has to be forced by the court to admit students to universities and even issues unlawful instructions that they must eliminate students in universities. Millions more are homeless. Households are plunged to darkness because the neo-colonial regime now in power wants to auction Eskom to the whites who maintain their lavish lifestyles. We must today, as Sobukwe did in 1960, draw a line and in the sand, us as the people and the rented sellouts now in power. We must properly characterize the ANC and reject it as the main violator of human rights in this country on behalf of their handlers. The persecution of students who are demanding their right to education must be stopped, comrades. The police that derived from the killing of and beating up of Black protesters must be stopped. The normalization of poverty in this country and the pain that Black people go through must be stopped. These can only be stopped once the Black representatives of colonialism and apartheid now in power are removed. There is no difference between the ANC and the parties representing white supremacists. That is why they are now an unholy alliance with the prime defenders of colonialism in this house. We are on our own, and it is only us who can reclaim our rights in this country We can no longer breathe. The ANC leg is sitting on our necks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. And the next speaker is the Honorable Ngoba from the IFP.
Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. The fight for the recognition of fundamental human rights came at the great cost for South Africa, a country nearly torn apart by its violent history. On Sunday, 21 March, we honor all those brave South Africans who stood up against an authoritarian and unscrupulous apartheid government on 21 March 1960 and paid dearly for it with their lives. This is a stark reminder that the fight for a constitutional democracy in which each citizen is guaranteed the right to participate politically and have an equal say in how our society is governed should never be taken for granted. Those who suffer as a result of looting of state resources are human beings too. Those poorest of the poor who have nothing to eat while the rich swim in honey are human beings too. Those who have no access to tarred roads are human beings too. Those who drink water with donkeys and other animals while others are having clean tap water are human beings too. And we all know where the greatest looting takes place through all the spheres of government. Looting of the resources which take place at the national level has surprised us all. Looting which takes place at the provinces is also very much surprising. The magnitude of looting in districts and local municipalities is horrible, to say the least. This is not the South Africa we fought for. The global COVID-19 pandemic has shown as more than ever how precarious the guarantee of fundamental human rights and how critical it is to ensure that checks and balances on government power is maintained. The restriction of human rights during this pandemic calls us to question power and to always, honorable members, question the justification and rationality thereof. This pandemic has shown us how easy it could be for a government to abuse human rights, all in the name of greater good. Our country's men and women have fought very long for the recognition as equal citizens. This pandemic cannot be used to undermine that we have fought for. Let us not be passive bystanders during this pandemic. Going forward, our government's vaccine rollout and response to the pandemic must be cemented in human rights. According to the Joint United Nations Program on HIV and AIDS on rights in the time of COVID-19, countries can learn much from global response to HIV epidemic in ensuring their response to this pandemic is based on human rights. One of the key aspects highlighted by this UNAIDS report is that communities must be at the center of decision-making, governance, and monitoring. In the rollout of the government's vaccine program, we need to ensure we are communicating to all communities, especially those vulnerable communities. We need to ensure we are consulting all stakeholders ranging from private sector, the schools, hospitals, and traditional leaders. Only by involving all members of our diverse society can we ensure. Thank you.
Freedom Front Plus, thank you very much. Freedom Front Plus, The Honorable Van Staden.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, hierdie naweek vier ons Menseregte Dag in Suid-Afrika en hierdie debat gaan oor die bevordering van menseregte in die era van COVID-19. Maar het ons as Suid-Afrikaners werklik iets om te vier? Ongelukkig is dit 'n feit wat sedert Maart 2020 bewys is dat hierdie regering sekerlik die voorlopers is in die skending van menseregte in Suid-Afrika. Hierdie regering het met sy sinnelose regulasies nie net gesorg vir die moontlike gruwelike skending van menseregte nie, maar het ook bygedra tot moontlike lewensverliese. A report issued by the International Commission of Jurists found that South Africa have violated the rights of women and healthcare workers in its response to COVID-19. The lockdowns interrupted or completely shut down health services for women. It disrupted services for survivors of gender-based violence. It led to an increase in violence against women and girls. More women and girls were trapped in abusive environments, and the rape of children in temporary homeless camps is of the tragedies that happened during this government's senseless lockdowns. Probably the biggest violation that took place was the government's failing of healthcare workers by not providing them with adequate personal protective equipment. We all know that corruption with PPEs was indeed sending healthcare workers to their graves, while the thieves are still walking in our streets and reap the rewards of their theft. There were also the problems around quarantine facilities, where the FF Plus had to intervene to get plus minus 1,600 people out of these contaminated places that was not suitable at all for human consumption or accommodation. Not even a street dog would have stayed in these places or eat the rotten food that was served there. Lockdowns have also led to a lack of access to healthcare for other medical emergencies, lower tax revenues to provide social services, starvation and poverty from job losses. Reports state that South Africa are the worst affected by lockdowns due to a lack of financial resources and infrastructure to support people who have lost their jobs due to the collapse of the economy. TB en vigspasiënte kry nie die nodige behandeling by hospitale en klinieke nie. Hongersnood en wanvoeding is aan die orde van die dag. Die welstand van ons bejaardes en kinders is aan die agteruitgang. Noodsaaklike operasies is nou al vir 'n jaar uitgestel en algemene siektetoestande skakel om in erge siektetoestande en armoede skiet natuurlik die hoogte in. On top of this, 11.1 million people are currently unemployed. We have 200,000 street homeless people. 13.6% of South Africans live in informal dwellings. There is a housing backlog of 2.6 million houses. We have 5.3 million households and 21 million people without clean water, and more than 12,000 homes still use buckets for toilets. The vaccines that is busy turning into a disaster could also turn into a violation of human rights by the government against the people of South Africa. Then there was farm murders, affirmative action, expropriation without compensation, and the latest, people who are dying on our roads due to potholes not being repaired and the total collapsing of our municipal infrastructure. This government, who was proud to say and preach for 27 years that they were the forerunners in upholding human rights, and even every year have human rights speeches and festivities, are probably the ones on the end that are the biggest violators of human rights throughout the world. The whole world saw firsthand how this government corruption sent people to their graves and how horribly they have treated the citizens of this country and still do. Daar was en sal nooit enige bevordering van menseregte wees in Suid-Afrika onder 'n ANC bewind nie. Dankie voorsitter.
Thank you very much, honorable member. The next speaker is the Honorable KRJ Mishwe.
Chairperson, human rights have been severely limited in the year of COVID-19, particularly the rights of churches and Christians in general. For an example, on the 6th of March 2021, about 30 vehicles, 3 Nyalas, 2 water cannons, a helicopter, and dozens of police officers descended on Unity Church in Soweto in a display of military power last seen under the National Party apartheid government to harass and intimidate a church led by a woman, Pastor Mkuba. They claimed that they were responding to complaints about noise from the church. The ACDP condemns this abuse of power and grotesque use of state resources. Why did the police have to use a helicopter when responding to a complaint about the noise? This fruitless expenditure must be properly investigated by the Auditor General. When the pastor was arrested, she was not read her rights or told the charges against her. When she asked where she was being taken to, she was told, I quote, "You will meet your snake, Pambi," close quote. She spent many hours sitting in the van, and when she asked again at the police station why she had been arrested, she was allegedly assaulted by a JMPD officer. The ACDP wants this incident to be properly investigated. Secondly, when given reasons why he decided to appeal the order, apologize and retract statements in support of Israel, Chief Justice Mogoeng said, and I quote, "Judges, as citizens, have constitutional rights of freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, and freedom of opinion. It is not correct to say that when you assume office, you'll automatically let go of your constitutional rights," close quote. Those calling on Chief Justice Mogoeng to retract these statements and apologize for his remarks because the Judicial Conduct Committee ruled that he had contravened the Judicial Code of Conduct should answer the question whether this code trumps the Chief Justice's constitutional rights to freedom of religion and expression. I believe such a position would set a very dangerous precedent for the future of our constitutional democracy. In the case between MEC for Education versus PLENARY, Durban Girls High School refused a Hindu pupil permission to wear a gold nose stud to school on the basis that it violated the school's code of conduct. The Constitutional Court ruled that the school's code of conduct was discriminatory against the students' culture and therefore violated her constitutional right to religion. There should be no exception with the Chief Justice. I believe his constitutional right to express his religious beliefs should trump the Code of Judicial Conduct. The ACDP agrees with the Chief Justice's refusal to retract or apologize for stating that he loves Israel, Palestinians, and everyone else. We salute and respect him for his commitment to love everyone and his refusal to hate. As leaders, we must
Thank you, Ralawanda Temishwe. Ralawanda. The speaker from the UDM. ATM. The next speaker is from Good, Honorable S.N. August.
Honorable Chairperson, it is challenging to celebrate human rights when the conditions in which so many of our people live would be aptly described as human wrongs. These conditions are not the pandemic's fault, but what COVID has done to expose the injustices brought by gross inequality. It's not that they weren't there, but more a case of our choosing not to see them. Pre-COVID, the state at its various levels commonly held functions in communities to hold Human Rights Day, and the contribution of heroes to the creation of our Constitution with its Bill of Rights. The routes to and from these events, locations were generally tidied up, so when the minister and senior officials swept by, they wouldn't see the fall. But the truth is that the manner in which many of our people live is a human wrong. The conditions in which they are forced to live contribute to an environment in which people cannot reach their potential, abuse substances, drop out, feel hopeless, commit crimes, and perpetrate human rights abuses. It is this environment, this vicious cycle, that fuels gender-based violence, gangsterism, and other social ills. While media coverage might suggest otherwise, with its regular focus on middle-class victims, the overwhelming majority of human rights violations are perpetrated against the poor. Living in townships like Zwaida and Nyanga places firmly at the coalface of human rights abuse. Chairperson, as MPs, we must take a large proportion of blame for allowing this situation to continue. In the DA-led Western Cape, where I live, the province argued in court in the Tafelberg land case that it was under no obligation to unlock public land for the purpose of providing affordable housing in well-located areas. ANC-led provinces are less blunt, but have made little more progress in unstitching the Apartheid Group Areas Act and moving towards achieving spatial and environmental justice. Yet millions of residents are without land or shelter. When officials, such as those in the Gauteng Health Department, balloon tenders to skim millions of rands of the transactions for themselves, they are not just stealing, but contributing to the continued perpetration of human wrongs. In the Northern Cape Hantam, communities live without water. On the Cape Flats, gangsters roam the streets, making them unsafe for good people, with women and children most at risk. Access to decent health care, water, and safer streets are basic human rights. Our people also have rights to decent education, job opportunities, and equal services in their communities. Chair, good appeals to each and every citizen this Human Rights Month to each play a part in upholding the rights of family, neighbors, or colleagues. To our fellow parliamentarians, thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable August. The next speaker on the platform is from the NFP, the Honorable Sibisi.
If we are going to talk about promoting human rights in South Africa in the age of COVID-19, limits the extent to which we can debate human rights in the South African context beyond COVID-19. Though we can appreciate a closer look into human rights during COVID-19, particularly how COVID-19 has impacted human rights in the South African context, we have to acknowledge that the majority of South African human rights are compromised on a daily basis. The present moral outrage on human rights by the South African government is the failure to ensure equity in vaccine distribution. The Department of Health reported that the Pfizer vaccine, which is 20 million doses, is expected to arrive by the end of March. We can only hope that the country is not exposing or is not expecting soon to expire goods, and the distribution will be done in an equitable manner. Failure to achieve that exposes our people further to violation or compromise of their human rights. COVID-19 is still very much alive. South Africa just came out of a second wave, and the third wave is expected to hit us. Looking at what is happening in the country today, with rising super spreader events happening, such as the strikes and protests, one after the other, is extremely concerning. Reports have shown that just 10 countries have administered more than 75 of all COVID-19 vaccines. We still haven't enough begun scratching the surface with our vaccination rollout. We are still asking ourselves, what are some of the measures taken by the government to improve conditions in the long term, such as water and sanitation, access to higher education, access to functional public health infrastructure? Has money even been employed in South Africa and boost the economy? It is appalling how this government has not yet realized that the virus has shrunk civil rights in the civic space. And the failure to act quicker to acquire a vaccine with the looming third wave is the direct failure by this government to protect lives. Promoting human rights should go beyond the age of COVID-19. This virus has exposed the vulnerabilities of our communities. Our human rights have been directly violated in the age of this virus. Funding that was allocated to saving and providing PPEs to South Africans ended up in the pockets of those who are vested with the responsibility to serve. Law enforcement agencies said that they are investigating more than 30 billion in potential corrupt coronavirus spending or contracts. This money could have been used to reduce the student debt we see our youth fighting against today. This corruption is a direct violation of our children's basic right, access to education.
Thank you very much. From the GA, the Honorable Ismail.
The right to have access to healthcare services is a basic human right guaranteed by the Constitution. Section 27 of the Constitution provides that everyone has the right to have access to healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare services, and no one may be refused emergency medical treatment. Where does one start? With the life acid debacle, where hundreds of innocent people who could not talk for themselves will have to die in the most horrific circumstances? Or perhaps oversights to hospitals where mothers with their newborn babies are lying on the floors of maternity wards because there were no beds or facilities. What of the many poor women who have been forced to have their babies at the gates of hospitals and clinics because there was either no one to assist them or anyone who was willing to? And where they did manage to get into a clinic, their babies were born by the light of a cell phone because the generators did not work and there was no electricity due to Eskom's inefficiency. That's why allowing power from independent grids will promote human rights. Government has not learned from its mistakes, as seen in a centralized vaccination plan. Leaving people's access to vaccines solely dependent on government silences their voices and removes their power. Should government fail again, even more lives will be lost. At every single NHI hearing that we attended, people pleaded for improvement in the emergency services sector, and in particular, ambulances. In response to a recent question, the minister confirmed that in many districts, one ambulance is required to cover an area of up to 20,000 kilometers. This denies the poor and vulnerable in these areas access to the most basics of rights, with many passing away after hours of waiting for hours. The DA envisages a strong doctor-driven primary healthcare system based on the social model of health and thus equipped to contribute to the dealing with the full range of social detriments of health. This model allows for localized healthcare service delivery through strong community-based structures. Millions of rands worth of PPE corruption was uncovered during the first major COVID-19 lockdown. Yet, hundreds of healthcare workers throughout South Africa did not get proper access to PPE and hundreds have died. In fact, while our healthcare workers were suffering the effects of COVID-19, the PPE they may well have saved their lives was shipped to Cuba. Since February, the SIU is investigating 2,300 COVID procurement contracts worth over 10 billion rand. Based on such scandals, it is clear that our public health system are deeply corrupt across the country, which is a major cause for concern given the centralized structure of the NHI. The consequences of this will be putting all South Africans' lives at risk. Life and healthcare go hand in hand. In order for South Africans to live long and healthy lives, we need to improve our healthcare system from its core. Only then can citizens realize the fundamental human right of access to quality healthcare. Our South African doctors and nurses are staggering from exhaustion during the COVID-19 pandemic. They are forced to work hours long with additional duties of feeding patients, washing laundry, and cleaning the wards, including the ICUs. Why? Because health facilities are understaffed, health budgets do not deal with basic requirements, and financial mismanagement is rife. Doctors and nurses have human rights too. The stories of people fighting each other for access to oxygen were plentiful. In KZN, it was deemed okay to convert an open-air garage into a COVID-19 ward in the middle of winter. And in the Eastern Cape, it was considered okay to transport patients to healthcare facilities in a scooter. Government needs to increase vaccinations from 10,000 to over 140,000 to reach our targets and rectify the rollout plan. Access to healthcare and complementary access to vaccines to save lives is a human right, and we must do everything in our power to protect these rights. I have but scratched the surface. Simply put, the breaches of the most basic right to reasonable access to healthcare blow our minds, and it is a crying shame that the poor and vulnerable in South Africa are treated with such disdain. Cry, COVID-19 has laid bare our failing health system and government's delays and lack of political will to source vaccines timelessly to save lives. Cry, our beloved country.
Thank you, Honorable Asina. Thank you so much. From the ANC, the Honorable Mukachwa. Honorable Mukachwa.
House Chairperson, members of Parliament, fellow South Africans, good afternoon. This afternoon, I wish for us to reflect on the impact that the digital surge has had on human rights in the era of COVID-19. In light of the many lives that we have lost to this pandemic, it remains an honor and privilege, honorable members, to stand alongside yourselves during this engagement as we in advance remember the lives that were lost 61 years ago in the Sharpeville massacre on the 21st of March. This debate challenges us to genuinely reflect on a matter that the history of this country can never allow for us to take for granted. We must and will not forget that at some point, not so long ago, the people of this country did not have a Bill of Rights as listed in the country's constitution, but promoted and protected their basic human rights despite their race, class, gender, and amongst other identities. And thus, as leaders and as citizens collectively, we must unwaveringly uphold and defend these rights from any elements, Chief Whip, any elements that seek to undermine them. Today, we engage under unforeseen and unprecedented circumstances where South Africa and the world at large fight against a virus that puts the one basic fundamental human right, the right to life, at risk. Citizens, healthcare workers, scientists, educators, government officials, public representatives across political lines, and a load of collectives have over the last 12 months worked day and night to protect this first generation human right, which is the right to life. In controlling the spread of the virus and protecting the right to life, the immediate response was to limit contact, thus limiting movement in order to break the chain of infection. This included social distancing, quarantining, isolating, lockdowns, curfews, border closures, travel restrictions, school closures, office closures, amongst other distancing measures. Upon honest human instinctual and to a great extent scientific reflection, these measures seem to be the most practical and necessary to stop transmission of the virus. And noting the magnitude of demand the virus would have on the healthcare system, these measures equally ease a strain on the healthcare system in order to save lives. Although attempting to protect one right on the one hand, on the other hand, these restrictions limited access to other rights. Members would understand that international law permits certain restrictions on freedom of movement for reasons of security and national emergencies, such as this national state of disaster. Now, by limiting the right to freedom of movement in order to protect the right to life, rights to education, trade, healthcare, food, assembly, security, privacy, amongst others were impacted and limited. But because of the dedication of this government and the dedication it has to upholding our Bill of Rights, at no point were these restrictions unnecessarily used. They have been used for a particular purpose, proportionately and without discrimination. Now, the limiting of human interaction in order to preserve human life necessitated a need to find ways of continuing to promote and protect all other first, second, and third generation rights that support this fundamental right to life. This resulted in an accelerated and rapid digital surge. Society instinctively attempted to continue exercising their rights electronically, digitally, virtually, remotely, and later hybridly. This moment has led to an increased conversation around what some have deemed fourth generation rights. Fourth generation rights can be summarized as rights to information and communication technologies and to digital existence, which are protected by digital rights. As a society, we have taken great reliance on digital solutions through e-learning, e-working, e-medicating, e-shopping, e-conferencing, e-protesting, e-legislating, e-oversight, e-yonkinto. But the point is, we have literally attempted to protect the livelihood of our citizens by attempting to exist in cyberspace. And whilst it seemed like a brilliant move, in a country like ours, Chief Whip, that faces legacy inequalities, these digital solutions only highlighted the disparities within our society. This digital divide is characterized by a struggling national information and communication technology infrastructure, by unreliable access to electricity, exorbitant data costs, and by socio-economic inequalities, which lead to differentiated household abilities to prioritize, for example, the purchasing of Wi-Fi or tech devices. So while some schools had the ICT capacity to roll out their teaching and learning programs on Google Classroom, and on the other hand, also use remote learning portals such as Microsoft Teams, some schools simply could not. While some parents managed to purchase or share laptops or Wi-Fi with their children, other parents could not trade and thus couldn't even pay for electricity. The government had to think innovatively, like many other governments globally, on how to promote this right to education under such difficult realities. This included, firstly, the digital conversion of all educational content for the department to have it broadcasted on radio, TV, WhatsApp, social media platforms, and then also ensuring the zero rating of DBE, the basic education, provincial and national websites and related educational sites. While some universities were able to purchase laptops on behalf of students and were the first ones to secure data packages for their students, others had to wait for government intervention. Which is why, Chief Whip, the timeless rollout of laptops by NSFAS was fundamental and must remain a concern of our government. That said, the Department of Higher Education negotiated favorable rates for students with all mobile network providers. This was further supported by zero rating of educational content of higher education institutions, colleges, and public and private publishers. This time has truly highlighted the inequities in our society. So when we introspect on Human Rights Day, we must recommit ourselves to the total eradication of all inequalities. You see, the ANC recognizes that rapid modernization of technology contains possibilities of improving human condition. It is for this reason that government is currently having an auction for access to spectrum by network providers to improve connectivity, to develop new tech such as 5G access, and to lower data costs in order to support public use of schools, e-health, e-government systems. This is also promoted by the SA Connect program that expands broadband access for government facilities such as schools, health facilities, and municipalities. COVID has impacted our lives in ways we could have never imagined, and there's possibly no turning back to life before this. It is thus imperative that we accelerate access to information and communication network and technologies and bridge the digital divide. This moment here has affirmed that the call for data to fall is legitimate, as access to information is a fundamental human right. But as we overcome the structural needs to ICT, there comes the need to strengthen cybersecurity through digital rights. Many users are beginning to rely on digital resources extensively, some for the first time, and are becoming targets to fraud and scams. With the boom in e-commerce, how do we protect citizens' digital monies every time they make a transaction online? How do we make sure that when children are in their virtual classrooms, they are safe from the intrusion of hackers? How do we make sure that when government sits meetings, those meetings are protected from hackers? How do we make sure that the social grants that are administered online are not redirected by hackers? How do we make sure that the data collected through apps created to monitor populations for tracking of the virus is not stolen by hackers? And Chief Whip, one must say that we truly remain proud of the work that's done by the Department of Science and Innovation in finding innovative technologies to responding and promoting human rights during this COVID-19 pandemic. How do we protect our citizens from virtual gender-based violence as more people relate on social media platforms? Ahead of this moment, the ANC in its 54th conference resolved that there is a need to strengthen capability for cybersecurity, and that critical infrastructure must be created to protect society against fake news like we've seen during this pandemic, cybercrime, and other various forms of hacking. During this pandemic, it has been evident that there's great digital surge and that we need to secure and ensure that there are information control mechanisms. So much is being administered virtually: academic certificates, medical records, web contracts, which are now also referred to as smart contracts. This requires that institutions and government implement massive security arrangements through, for example, blockchain technologies that can ensure and authenticate the above mentioned. So we trust in the Department of DSI to lead us in the strengthening of innovations that will manage secure online interactions for education, healthcare, and e-commerce. More people are working from home, and this puts a lot of strain on them. This requires us to zoom into the evolution of labor protective policies that will allow for workers to be supported in this digital world, even in relation to techno stress and digital fatigue, which speaks to the protection of mental health. Digital technologies must not be a source of further division and infringement on the rights of our society. They must be used as a tool to protect, promote, and uphold the rights of our people. This digital surge requires a multi-pronged response from the DSI, the Department of Communications, the Department of Justice, and other public entities, but as well as society at large. This moment of which this country has had to exist and thrive requires us as citizens of South Africa across political affiliations, private sector, and various social institutions to work hand in hand to make sure that the efforts of Charlotte Maxeke and all our foremothers do not go in vain. This moment does not require for us to point fingers, but requires and how we can promote and uphold. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Isikhulumo esilandelayo siqhamuka AIC, kodwa he seems not to be here, so we'll move to COPE. Dr. Majisha. Adamela Ndadi.
Thank you, Chair. Human Rights Day is an extremely important day in the history of South Africa. It is on this day that we remember our past, assess our present, and say where must our country be in many decades to come. On this day, we remember and celebrate the political victory achieved by millions of South Africans. I say political victory because, yes, that is the only achievement South Africans can enjoy, thou not wholly, because we stand here today to debate the promotion of human rights in the age of COVID-19. I shall refer the House to our country's Constitution, Chapter 2, Section 27, which insists that all South Africans have a right to health care, food, water, and social security. I put it before this House that the majority of South Africans have not been tested, and therefore more still must be done to ensure that healthcare directive and that which appears in the Constitution gets satisfied. The majority of South Africans I refer to live in villages and tin houses, in rural areas and townships, in the street corners and all dirty places in our country. Indeed, more must be done. They must be tested and given medicine. The problem COVID brings to South Africans is not physical death and personal suffering only. It also helps government to hide its failures behind COVID-19. Government is failing to create jobs for millions of South Africans. It does nothing to stop poverty. It does nothing to stop stealing from the many within itself. It has taken South Africans back to 1948 when apartheid was formally introduced. It uses COVID as a temporary, ill-manufactured tears to quell anger of South Africans. When the young and the old people rise to march for their constitutional rights, they are shot and killed. Let's ask a question. What next? I must say that those of us who, during the apartheid years, were arrested and beaten up, our relatives and thousands of South Africans who were forced to escape to countries beyond South Africa's borders, many other South Africans who were taken to what was called Hangpal, as we called it, of course, are disappointed. But I must say that we've gone back and apartheid has come back, and ANC truly is unfortunate, has killed us. ANC has destroyed this country and is going on to destroy the country. This is a terrible party, really. I am disappointed. Thank you.
The next speaker is the Honorable Hendricks Al-Jamal.
The Human Rights Declaration in Africa this year has to be that the vaccine must be manufactured in Africa, by Africa, for Africa, and government has to make this happen. That government is already trying to get the relaxation of intellectual property rights is commendable despite the objections of America and Britain. Government took the right step by accepting Al-Jamal's proposal to consolidate PPE and vaccines continentally. In the sixth parliament, there are so many sincere, honorable members of parliament that are hardworking and excited about their oversight role and eager to carry out their mandate that the country will enjoy the best human rights culture in the world. Al-Jamal salutes them. This excludes Honorable Suripen, who makes wild claims that Al-Jamal takes orders from the SG of the governing party. It is his party that commits some of the worst human rights abuses against the African child in Masiphumeleli. Yes, we are a small party, but we took a seat away from your party in Lenasia, and we will take away 10 more, Honorable Suripen. The public protector sat down the DA Mayor of Cape Town after walking on the banks of 7 waterways overflowing with sewage into people's houses in Masiphumeleli, where whites nearby are hell-bent on preventing black creep to preserve the last white outpost, and told her, Mayor, this is the worst living conditions I've seen in my life, and you better fix it. Today, many of these residents are living on dry land, as Al-Jamal has been campaigning for. Near Sanfra in Makassar in Cape Town, the first Muslim settlement, and including Kailitsa, the Director of Environmental Enforcement has issued sanctions against the city of Cape Town without saying that the toxin generated by them pumping poorly treated sewage into the rivers are causing 1 million people to be poisoned, slow poisoning. It's like chemical warfare, the apartheid regime unleashed on the Cape Flats. Now, that's why that precinct is a failed precinct. We voted against the inquiry on the public protector from our experience with her, and not the experiences that DA-connected boardrooms had with her, and now supported by the governing party. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has recommended an inquiry into the deaths of hundreds of actors be reopened, like the unnatural death of Imam Abdullah Harun. Money must be ring-fenced, like ring-fenced money for restitution, to fund these investigations. That this is not done sends a signal that the government party does not want to deal with the atrocity of the past. Thank you very much, Honorable House Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Khanif. I will now call the Honorable Bergman from the GA.
Thank you, Chair. Today as a country, we keep an audible silence about these ancestors of the generations that live, fearful to admit the horror of a former deed, seeking to obliterate from our memories a cruel occurrence which in its remembering should teach us not and never to be inhuman again. The poem of former President Thabo Mbeki in I Am an African teaches us that this continent has suffered and has endured. It has taken a beating, yet it has been blessed with the most natural resources and some of the most majestic beauty. On Human Rights Day, we should be celebrating a continent of wealth, health, and beauty, with its unique culture that would draw tourists from all over the world to all our countries and make our land prosper and shine as the stones that lie beneath us. The problem is Africa is plagued by its memories and abuses. Our leaders continue to misdirect aid and hamper trade. The African Union, a shining symbol of hope, was formed to lead us out of the desert and pull us into prosperity. Yet through COVID-19, whilst our country had the privilege of the chair, we were treated to front row seats to the inner workings and the potential of this Messiah. Unfortunately, it has left me with more angst than hope, especially since we were the ones in the pilot seat and we were the ones that could have stamped our own brand of leadership. We have the most progressive constitution in the world, although there are many in this house that would like to trample on it and insult their forefathers that spent countless and painful hours drawing it up for the benefit of all. Our constitution was created to protect us, our human rights, from falling into the same traps that Africa continues to find itself. Under COVID-19, we have seen that what it means for leaders to put personal power ahead of PPE, as can be seen in some of the questionable elections like in Tanzania, Uganda, and Guinea, where opposition leaders in some of these countries are still holed up in jail, and the world is still silent about it. However, the AU silence is the most disturbing of all. The fatal casualties of political opponents in these countries constantly ticking is the only noise during this silence. I will only celebrate human rights when my brothers and sisters in the whole of Africa can. In Cameroon and now Ethiopia, nothing short of genocide is taking place, and more efforts are being made in the halls of Washington, Geneva, and Paris than in the AU. How can we make it other people's problems? This must be Africa's problem, and we must help now with African solutions. We cannot celebrate human rights until the AU is making it their mission to liberate Africa. People in benches in our house celebrate President Mugabe for successful restorative justice and believe that he laid down the path for equal wealth and state control. They cannot concede that people are suffering and that if it was not for South Africa and our infrastructure we provide them, Zimbabwe would not just be out of money, power, medicine, and fuel, but could be our biggest concentration camp on our doorstep. The question that people of our Green Book need to honestly ask themselves is, what happens when South Africa and Zimbabwe both land up in the same state at the same time? My fellow Africans, let's not sink Africa and destroy her wealth and beauty. Let's all come together and let's show the world the real Mama Africa. It is time for Africa to rise and for us to stop fighting each other in cages for the excitement and benefits of one colonizer to the next. I come of those who were transported from India and China, who being resided in the fact solely that they were able to provide physical labor, who taught me that we could both be at home and be foreign, who taught me that human existence itself demanded that freedom was a necessary condition for that human existence. being part of all these people and in the knowledge that no one dare contest that assertion, I shall claim that I am an African. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Bergman. The Honorable Makwanishe is the next speaker.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson, Deputy President, honorable members. As we commemorate the Human Rights Month in our 27-year-old democracy, we commemorate it with a deep sense of sadness as we bid farewell to all those who have left us during the last year. We commemorate Human Rights Month under a challenging climate of COVID-19 pandemic, which has been with us for almost a year now. The devastating effect of coronavirus on human life, human rights, and the economy has been felt by all. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, correctly diagnoses the problem as follows, and I quote, "The COVID-19 pandemic is a public health emergency, but it is far more. It is an economic crisis, a social crisis, and a human crisis that is fast becoming a human rights crisis. Human rights cannot be an afterthought in times of crisis, and we now face the biggest international crisis in generations. The message is clear. People and their rights must be front and center. Human rights lens puts everyone in the picture and ensures that no one is left behind. Human rights responses can help beat the pandemic, putting a focus on the imperative of healthcare for everyone, but they also serve as essential warning system, highlighting who's suffering most, why and what can be done about it. We have seen how the virus does not discriminate, but its impact do, exposing deep weaknesses in the delivery of public services and structural inequality that impedes access to them. We must make sure they are properly addressed in the response." Close quote. House Chair, our Constitution was adopted to, amongst others, heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. It was adopted to lay the foundation for a democratic and open society based on the will of the people. Furthermore, it was adopted to improve the quality of life of all citizens and to free the potential of each person. The Constitution provides a historic bridge between the past of a deeply divided society, characterized by strife, conflict, and untold suffering and injustice, and a future founded on the recognition of human rights, democracy, and peaceful coexistence and development opportunities for all South Africans, irrespective of color, race, class, belief, or sex. Human rights have defined the struggle for freedom and justice as led by the African National Congress. The ANC's Bill of Citizenship Rights of 1943, the African Claims of 1943, the Freedom Charter of 1955, and the Harare Declaration of 1989 became important points of reference during the multi-party negotiations which yielded our democratic constitution and its Bill of Rights. The historic task of the ANC has been to create a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous South Africa. The Bill of Rights is the cornerstone of our democracy. It enshrines the rights of all people in our country and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. The state must not only respect, protect, and fulfill the rights in the Bill of Rights, but also promote them. Our Bill of Rights provides for 3 generations of rights, namely the first generation rights, which include the right to life, equality, human dignity, freedom of expression, religion, association, political rights, and the rights to peaceful assembly and demonstration. These rights are guaranteed in most democratic countries. The second generation rights are the socio-economic rights. These rights place a duty on government to work to provide education, health services, water, and housing. South Africa is one of the few countries in the world to entrench second-generation rights in the Constitution. The last group is known as the third-generation rights. These rights, this generation of rights include the right to have environment protected, the right of access to information, and just administrative action. In the first certification judgment, the Constitutional Court acknowledged that there is a nexus between the government meeting socio-economic needs of the people and people exercising their civil and political rights. This was echoed by Justice Albissex, wherein he acknowledged that the greater majority of South Africans had never enjoyed first or second generation rights, and that the achievement of first generation rights is fundamental to the establishment of democracy and overcoming national oppression. But for the vote to have meaning, for the rule of law to have content, the vote must be the instrument of achieving second and third generation rights. The learned justice further remarked that it would be a sad victory if the people had a right to vote every 5 years or so, to emerge from forced removal hostels and second-rate group areas homestead, to go to the polls, only thereafter to return to their inferior houses, inferior education, and inferior jobs. He noted that the fundamental constitutional problem is not to set one generation of rights against another, but to harmonize all of them. In the Ready to Govern document, the ANC declared that the Bill of Rights will guarantee that South Africa is a multi-party democracy. The Bill of Rights shall be binding upon the state and organs of government at all levels, and where appropriate on social institutions and persons. Moreover, the Bill of Rights will be enforced by the courts, headed by a separate, newly created constitutional court, which will have the task of upholding fundamental rights and freedoms of all citizens against the state or anybody or person seeking to deny those rights. One of the most distinctive elements of the South African jurisprudence has been our Constitutional Court's willingness to adjudicate socio-economic rights in addition to political and other rights. While the advancement of socio-economic rights has proceeded at a relatively slow pace than political equality, the constitutional protection of socio-economic rights and its enforcement by the courts continues to be an inspiration. South Africa has developed a comprehensive socio-economic jurisprudence that enforces an array of social protection, including right of access to housing, healthcare, and education. Since its establishment in 1995, the Constitutional Court chose to adjudicate socio-economic rights as means of transformative purpose of our Constitution. The Constitutional Court in the case of Sabrumane versus the MEC of Health in KwaZulu-Natal said the following, and I quote, "We live in a society in which there are great disparities in wealth. Millions of people are living in deplorable conditions in great poverty. These conditions already existed when the Constitution was adopted, and a commitment to address them and transform our society into one which there will be human dignity, freedom, and equality lies at the heart of our constitutional order." Close quote. It is in this case that the court confirmed the enforceability of socio-economic and second-generation rights. The two landmark judgments which were passed by the Constitutional Court are the Minister of Health versus Treatment Action Campaign, which was about right of access to healthcare, and the Government of South Africa versus Grootboom, which was about access to housing. These are two examples of the rich jurisprudence emanating from our court in interpreting and enforcing socio-economic rights. Chairperson, the COVID-19 pandemic has come with many disruptive elements in our lives, which have limited our human rights. The justice system has not been spared. Section 34 of the Constitution enshrines the right of access to courts. The Constitutional Court has, in relation to this right, held that it is fundamentally important to our democratic order. It is a cornerstone of the democratic architecture, but also a vehicle through which the protection of the Constitution itself may be achieved. The right of access to courts is thus protected in the Constitution. With the pronouncement of the state of disaster and implementation of national lockdown, the operations of courts were also affected. With that said, the pandemic also offered different opportunities to ensure that the right contained in Section 34 of the Constitution is promoted. During this period, the utilization of visual and remote court operations became important. Video conferencing technology has also been adopted by our courts to ensure that the legal system does not grind to a complete halt during the COVID-19 pandemic and the national lockdown. The COVID-19 pandemic has also brought with it many challenges and opportunities. It has further exposed the second pandemic, gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is a reflection of a patriarchal fiber of our society. Fighting gender-based violence requires a collaborative effort by government, Chapter 9 institutions, faith-based organizations, civil society, and the citizenry at large. Honorable Ngobo.
Excuse me, Honorable Makwanisha. Honorable members, please check your mics. That is disturbing. Sorry, Honorable Chair. You can continue.
Thank you very much, House Chair. Honorable Ngobo, those who loot or steal from Thank you, Chair. Those who loot or steal from the poor do not represent the Whatever the challenges of the moment are, we should continue to nurture the culture of human rights. We should never pander to populism as a shortcut to dealing with difficult challenges. It is easy to abandon civility for barbarism, but very difficult to move from barbarism to civility. Human rights gives us that chance. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Makwanisha. Honorable members, that concludes the debate and the business for the day. The House is adjourned. Take care.
Thank you, Chair.